Greetings, fellow fans. You're tuned into Fiction Moon, presenting to you today, What If Harry Was a True Phoenix Hybrid Who Burned Every Binding Dumbledore Placed and Rose from the Ashes at age 7, show some love by liking and subscribing. Enjoy the story ahead. Chapter 1, The Burning. The summer Aunt Petunia's roses died, nobody blamed the weather. They should have. It would have been easier. But the roses didn't wilt or brown or suffer through drought the way normal roses did. They simply ceased, one morning in late July, between the hours of 2 and 3 a.m., while the rest of Privet Drive slept behind their double-glazed windows and their net curtains and their careful ordinariness. By sunrise, where Petunia's prize-winning roses had stood, the ones she photographed every June and entered into the Little Whinging Horticultural Society, there was only a neat ring of ash, black and fine as powder, and in the center of it, a 7-year-old boy sitting cross-legged on the grass, breathing. Just breathing. His hands were open on his knees, palms up, and they were glowing. Not the pale, uncertain glow of a nightlight or a torch beam, something deeper than that. Something that came from inside the skin the way heat comes from coals after a fire's been put out. Orange gold. Steady. Alive. Harry Potter sat in the ash of his aunt's roses and breathed, and the glow faded slowly, the way a forge cools, and when it was gone he sat for a long moment in the dark with the July stars overhead and the neighbor's cat watching him from the fence with its tail curled around its paws. He felt, for the first time in his memory, completely clean. He didn't know what had woken him. He rarely knew, in those years, his body had its own alarm system, some instinct that kicked him upright before Uncle Vernon's footsteps reached the cupboard stairs, some animal awareness that kept him calibrated to the moods of the house. Tonight the house had been still, everyone deeply asleep, and yet something had pulled him out of his thin blanket and through the back door and into the garden. Not a sound. More like a pressure behind his sternum, a tightness that had been building for weeks, maybe months, maybe longer. Harry had stopped trusting his sense of time in a house where the days all looked the same. The tightness had become heat. The heat had become everything. He looked down at his hands now, turning them over, examining them in the moonlight. They looked like his hands. Small, a little scarred at the knuckles from garden work, nails short and clean because Petunia made him scrub them before meals. Nothing remarkable about them at all. And yet 20 minutes ago, or what felt like 20 minutes, time had done something strange in the middle of it. They had been filled with fire, and Harry hadn't screamed, hadn't run, hadn't panicked at all. He'd opened his hands and let it come out, and it had come out like exhaling. Like relief. Like something that had been locked up very tightly for a very long time had finally found a door. He pressed one hand flat against the grass beside the ash ring. The grass was cool and damp with night dew and it felt good against his palm. Real. He was real. The garden was real. He hadn't dreamed it. He looked at the ash. Sorry, he said quietly, to the roses, or to the night, or to no one at all. The neighbor's cat blinked at him with slow, orange eyes and said nothing useful. Harry stayed in the garden until the sky started to lighten in the east, that particular gray-pink that came before dawn proper, and he thought about what had happened with a thoroughness that probably would have surprised people who thought of him as just a strange, quiet child. He was 7 years old and he had no frame of reference for what he'd felt, no context, no mentor, no books on the subject. But he was also a child who had learned early that the world made more sense when you paid attention to it carefully, so he paid attention now, sitting in the ash with the dawn coming up, and he catalogued everything he could. The feeling before, pressure, heat, a sense of wrongness, not his own wrongness, but something imposed, something external that had been sitting on him the way you sit on a lid to keep a pot from boiling over. He'd felt wrong for years, now that he thought about it. A low-grade background wrongness, like a note played just slightly flat. He'd assumed it was him. He was strange, Dudley always said so, and Dudley's friends agreed, and even the teachers at school had that particular careful expression when they looked at Harry that said something is off about this one even if they couldn't name it. But tonight the wrongness had cracked, the way ice cracks in spring, sudden and total, and underneath it, Harry had found himself. Or something that had been waiting to be him. He flexed his fingers. Nothing glowed now. But the memory of it was in his hands like muscle memory, like knowing how to ride a bike. Not that Harry had ever ridden a bike, the Dursleys hadn't provided one. The point was, he knew it was there. And knowing it was there changed everything. By the time Petunia's alarm went off at 7, Harry was back in his cupboard, lying on his blanket with his eyes open, thinking very clearly. He needed information. He needed it before anyone who might want to give it to him selectively had the chance to control what version he received. Petunia's scream, when she found her roses, was something that the entire street heard. Harry heard it from the kitchen, where he was standing on his step stool making Dudley's breakfast, scrambled eggs, 4 slices of toast, 2 sausages from the pack in the fridge, and he didn't flinch. He turned the heat down slightly on the eggs so they didn't overcook, listened to Petunia's voice rise to a frequency that probably distressed dogs, and waited. She came in through the back door with her face the color of old chalk, and she looked at Harry with an expression he'd never quite seen on her before. Petunia had a whole library of expressions for Harry: contempt, irritation, a kind of vigilant unease, the occasional flash of something almost like guilt that vanished so quickly he couldn't be sure he'd seen it. This was none of those. This was pure, undiluted fear. "What did you do?" she said. Not a question. A sentence with no room in it. "I made breakfast," Harry said, nodding at the eggs. "They're done, I think. Or another minute if Dudley wants them firmer." "Don't." Her voice cracked. "Don't be clever." "My roses are ash," Harry agreed, and he met her eyes steadily in a way she clearly wasn't expecting because she stepped back, just slightly, her hand tightening on the door frame. "I know. I was there." Something moved across her face, recognition, horror, and underneath both of those, something older and more complicated. She pressed her lips together until they went white. Harry could see her deciding things, the decisions running across her face like weather. "It was an accident," she said finally. These things happen with, it was an accident and we won't discuss it." "You knew," Harry said. It came out very even, very quiet, and he watched it land. "You knew something like this might happen." Petunia's hand tightened further on the door frame until her knuckles went sharp. She was wearing her dressing gown, pale blue, her hair still in the foam rollers she slept in, and she looked simultaneously very ordinary and absolutely terrified, and Harry felt something in his chest that was not quite sympathy but was not unkind either. She was frightened. He understood being frightened. He simply wasn't frightened of the same things she was. "Vernon will," she started. "Uncle Vernon won't know," Harry said. "I'll tell him the roses got some kind of blight. There are gardening chemicals he can put down, he'll probably enjoy having a project." He paused. "But you're going to tell me what you know?" She stared at him. In 7 years of raising him, warehousing him, a more honest word, Harry had never spoken to her like this. No child spoke to Petunia like this. Dudley didn't dare and he was her sun and moon. "You are 7 years old," she said. "I'm aware," Harry said. He picked up a plate and began serving the eggs. "Dudley's toast is going cold. I'll leave it in the oven." He turned to look at her one more time. "I know you have letters. From my parents, or about them. Or about me." He watched her pupil's contract, which was confirmation enough. "I'd like them, please. I'll ask nicely. I'm asking nicely now." He smiled at her, small and precise. "But I'll find them either way." Petunia stared at him for a long, agonized moment, and then she said, "After Vernon leaves for work," in a voice that had all the life compressed out of it, and she went upstairs to fix her hair. The letters were in a biscuit tin. This was not where Harry would have hidden important documents, he'd have put them somewhere that didn't also contain evidence of itself, somewhere that a child rummaging through kitchen cupboards wouldn't eventually find, but Petunia was not, at her core, a strategic woman. She was a frightened woman, and frightened people hid things close. The tin was from a Christmas 20 years back, some corporate gift from Uncle Vernon's firm, red and gold and dented slightly at one corner. Petunia set it on the kitchen table in front of Harry and then sat down across from him with her tea and her expression like someone waiting for a tooth extraction. Inside the tin, 11 letters. A photograph. A folded piece of parchment that was not paper. Harry could tell the difference without being told, the way you can tell the difference between plastic and real leather by touching it. Something in him recognized the texture, reached toward it. He sorted through them methodically. Most were from Gringotts Bank. The name meant nothing to him yet, but the crest on the letterhead meant something to his hands, a warmth, a pull. One was from something called the Ministry of Magic, formal and stamped and full of language that danced carefully around what it actually meant. Two were in his mother's handwriting, which he recognized from the back of the photograph without needing to be told, Lily Potter née Evans, neat and slightly left slanting, with the particular loops of someone who'd been taught to write beautifully and had retained the habit. He read those last. First the Gringotts letters, which spoke of vaults and estates and a guardianship arrangement that made a muscle in his jaw tighten. Then the ministry letter, which referenced something called the Child Protection Binding, authorized under Albus Dumbledore, Chief Warlock, and the language was so thoroughly bureaucratic that you could read it 3 times and still only catch what it meant sideways, that something had been done to Harry Potter at approximately 14 months of age, for his own protection, in accordance with the will of his parents, and subject to annual review by the Chief Warlock. Harry read that sentence 4 times. In accordance with the will of his parents. He looked up at Petunia. Did my parents actually request this? Whatever was done to me. Petunia wrapped both hands around her mug. Lily didn't know, she said, and her voice had gone small in a way that sounded honest. The letter she sent me, after they died, she said Dumbledore had been protecting James and her, putting things in place. She found out about it in the last month. She was furious. Something moved through Petunia's expression, grief or something grief-adjacent that she hadn't shown in years. She wrote me because she didn't trust him and she wanted someone outside his world to know. To have it documented. She swallowed. I think she knew she might not, that things were, she was scared. Harry picked up the first of his mother's letters. He read it carefully, twice, while Petunia said nothing and the kitchen clock ticked. Lily Potter had been, evidently, a remarkable woman. The letter was clear, organized, furious, and precise. It named what Dumbledore had done in plain terms, a layered binding placed on Harry's magical core, accessing it through the blood wards at Godric's Hollow, designed to suppress and redirect his innate abilities until Dumbledore deemed him, in Lily's acid phrasing, appropriately prepared to receive them. It mentioned, in a line that Harry read 3 times and then set down carefully, that the binding had been necessary because Harry wasn't simply a magical child. He burns, pet, his mother had written. Not the way James does, not the way I do. When he's happy he glows, actually glows, and Dumbledore went white when he saw it. He says it's an inheritance, something very old in James's line, and he says it makes Harry too visible, too powerful, too young, and I know he means well, but I also know what he's actually saying. He's saying Harry is something he needs to manage. I won't have it. If anything happens to me and James, I know, but if it does, look after my boy, pet. Don't let them make him small. Harry set the letter down flat on the table. He smoothed it with his palm. Don't let them make him small. He thought about the binding, the thing he'd felt cracking open last night, the lid that had been pressed down on him since he was 1 year old. He thought about 6 years of being small, being managed, being the strange quiet child in the cupboard under the stairs who did other people's homework and made other people's breakfasts and grew up in someone else's shadow. Something in his chest burned once, hot and clean, and then settled. Thank you, he said to Petunia. He meant it. She looked at him across the table with something raw in her face. You look like her, she said, not for the first time, Harry supposed, but perhaps for the first time meaning something different by it. Around the eyes. When you're serious like that. "I know," Harry said, looking at the photograph. His mother in it was laughing, holding infant Harry up against a blue sky somewhere, and she was, in the photograph, glowing slightly too. Not the way he'd glowed last night, but warm. Lit from within. Harry looked at it for a long time. Then he packed everything back into the tin, tucked the tin under his arm, and went to his cupboard to think. He spent 3 days thinking. In those 3 days he was, by outward appearances, entirely normal. He made meals. He did the garden, the rose beds needed turning now, and he did it without being asked, which confused Petunia visibly. He helped Dudley find a video game he'd lost behind his bedroom radiator. He went to the shops on Tuesday because Petunia had a headache and needed paracetamol and didn't want to drive. Inside, he was building a plan the way you'd build a structure, foundations first, load-bearing walls second, nothing decorative until the thing would actually stand. What he knew, there was a magical world. He belonged to it. His mother had been part of it, his father had been part of it, and both of them were dead because of something in it. He had money, the Gringotts letters referenced a family vault and a trust vault, both in his name, both inaccessible to the Dursleys, both apparently administered by the same Albus Dumbledore who had spent 6 years managing him like a resource. He had an inheritance that was apparently alarming enough that the most powerful wizard in Britain had thought it worth binding at infancy. And the binding was gone now, burned away in 20 minutes of garden fire, and no one had come running. That last point was interesting. If Dumbledore had placed the binding, he ought to know it was broken. Either he didn't, which meant his monitoring of Harry was less comprehensive than Harry suspected, or he did know and was choosing to wait and see, which told a different story. Harry filed both possibilities and moved on. What he needed, access to his money. Access to information, real information, not the curated variety. And time, ideally, to develop his abilities without anyone deciding they needed to manage him again. The question was how to get from Privet Drive to Diagon Alley, that was the name in the Gringotts letters, when he was 7 years old, had no magical knowledge of transportation, and lived in a suburb of Surrey. The answer turned out to be a bus. He waited for a day when Uncle Vernon was at work and Aunt Petunia was at Mrs. No. 7's for their weekly coffee arrangement and Dudley was at a friend's. He put on his least awful clothes, which was a relative measure, since all his clothes were Dudley's cast-offs and therefore enormous on him, rolled up the jeans twice at the ankle, stuffed his feet into shoes he'd knotted tight enough to stay on, and took the emergency £20 note Petunia kept in the tea caddy. He left a note that said gone to the library, back for dinner and walked to the bus stop at the end of the road. The bus went to Guildford. From Guildford he found a train timetable. London was 40 minutes. He had enough money for the fare. He sat on the train with his hands in his lap and watched Surrey turn into the outskirts of London and felt the city coming toward him, the density of it, the noise and mass, and felt something in him respond to it. Not fear. The other thing. That forward-leaning sensation that was, he was beginning to understand, just what it felt like to be himself when nothing was pressing him flat. London. He'd never been to London. The Dursleys went occasionally for Christmas shopping or when Vernon had things at the office, but Harry was left home for those trips, given a list of chores and 2 digestive biscuits for lunch. He walked out of Waterloo Station into a July morning and stood on the south bank and looked at the Thames for exactly 2 minutes, because he allowed himself 2 minutes of being 7 years old and amazed before he got to work. He had an address from the Gringotts letter, Gringotts Wizarding Bank, Diagon Alley, London. He had no other geographical reference. He knew, from a second letter in the tin, that the entry to Diagon Alley involved a pub called the Leaky Cauldron, which was on Charing Cross Road. He took the tube. He was, even to himself, a slightly absurd sight, a small, underfed 7-year-old with enormous jeans and wire-framed glasses, riding the Northern Line with a tin biscuit box under his arm, reading the tube map with intense focus. A woman offered him her seat. A busker near the door played guitar badly. Harry worked out his stop, changed at Embankment, and surfaced at Leicester Square to walk the rest of the way. He found the Leaky Cauldron, or rather he didn't find it exactly. He was walking down Charing Cross Road, checking the numbers, and then he was walking past something that he'd somehow looked directly at without registering, and he stopped and went back, and there was a pub. It had been there the whole time. Narrow, dark-fronted, so thoroughly unremarkable that the eye simply slid off it. Harry stood in front of it and looked at it, and the not-quite-rightness of it resolved into a sense of shape, depth, presence, the same way one of those magic eye pictures resolves if you unfocus in exactly the right way. There you are, he thought, and pushed the door open. The inside of the leaky cauldron smelled like candle smoke and something rich and spiced, and the first thing Harry saw was a fireplace with actual flames in it in July, and the second thing was approximately 20 people who looked, without exception, absolutely nothing like anyone on Charing Cross Road outside. There was a woman in the corner with a pointed hat tilted at a precise angle, reading a copy of something with a cover that appeared to be moving. There were two men at the bar whose robes were deep red and had actual stars on them, not printed stars but embroidered ones that were very slowly migrating around the fabric. There was a boy about Harry's age near the back, crying quietly into a cup of something while his mother patted his hand with an air of brisk sympathy. There was a barman, old and toothless and cheerful, who looked up when Harry came in and had approximately 1 second of doing a double take before his expression went carefully neutral. Harry walked to the bar. "Excuse me," he said. "I need to get to Gringotts. Could you show me the way through?" The barman, Tom, it turned out, after a brief period of Harry just waiting patiently for the man to finish being surprised, showed him the courtyard, the brick wall, the sequence of taps. Harry memorized it in one pass. Tom started. "Thank you very much," Harry said, and tapped the bricks. The wall peeled open. Diagon Alley arrived with sound first, voices, the clatter of a shop door, the distant cry of something that was probably an owl but sounded larger than any owl Harry had seen. Then color, shop fronts painted in gold and green and deep blue, window displays containing things that moved, glittered, changed. A cauldron shop with stacks outside. A bookshop with paper animals in the window. A boy being towed by his father towards something that looked like a pet supply store, gesturing enthusiastically at a cage. Harry stood at the entrance for exactly 1 second, taking it in. Then he walked toward the white marble building at the end of the lane, because that was where the money was, and money was what he needed first. The goblins knew immediately. Not his name, they might have known his name, he wasn't sure, but they knew what he was in the first 10 seconds after he walked up to the counter, and he could tell because the nearest goblin, who had been writing something in a ledger with the mechanical efficiency of a machine, stopped writing. The goblin looked up. He was, as all goblins were, shorter than Harry by perhaps an inch, with long clever fingers and amber eyes and an expression of professional neutrality that had just developed one very small crack in it. The crack looked like interest. "Good morning," Harry said. "I need to access my trust vault. Harry Potter." The goblin's gaze traveled down to Harry's forehead, the scar that everyone apparently looked at, and Harry had already decided he had no patience for that particular fixation, and then back up to his eyes. It stayed on his eyes. "Identity verification will be required," the goblin said. "Of course," Harry said. The verification was a bloodletting, a small silver knife, a drop from his finger onto a piece of parchment that bloomed dark green where his blood touched. The goblin took the parchment and brought it to a second goblin, older, with more gold on his waistcoat. They conferred, briefly, in a language Harry didn't know. The older goblin turned and looked at Harry with an expression that had moved well past interest into something more like calculation. He walked over. "I am Ragnarok," he said. "I am the director of British operations for Gringotts." "Harry Potter," Harry said. "Nice to meet you." "You are 7 years old," Ragnarok said. "I'm aware," Harry said. He felt, distantly, that this was going to be a recurring observation from people. "You came here alone." "I did." Ragnarok looked at him for a long moment with those amber eyes. "The binding placed upon your core by Albus Dumbledore," he said carefully, "is no longer registered on our monitoring records. As of 3 days ago. No, Harry agreed. It's gone. You are aware of what you are. I'm working on it, Harry said honestly. I know something happened when it burned away. I know it's in my father's line. I know it was important enough that someone decided I needed to be prevented from knowing about it until they were ready to tell me. He held Ragnar's gaze. I'm done waiting for other people's timing. Ragnar was quiet for a long, thoughtful moment. Then, and this, Harry would think about later, was the beginning of something. The goblin smiled. Not his professional smile. Something that looked more genuine, sharp and considering and not entirely unlike respect. Your trust vault, Ragnar said, contains what was set aside for you at your parents' death. Your family vault, the Potter Vault, is sealed pending your 15th birthday, as per your parents' will, all accepting the provisions already applied to your trust. He paused. However, you are the heir to the Potter estate in full, and there are documents within the family vault that you are entitled to access via proxy, with a goblin-witnessed attestation. What documents? Harry asked. Your father's personal research, Ragnar said. And your mother's. And a sealed letter from your mother addressed to you, placed in vault before her death, flagged with a note. He consulted the parchment again, that reads, for Harry, when he burns for the first time, open immediately. Harry's hands went very still. I'd like to access that now, he said. His voice was entirely steady. Please. They took him down on the cart, the wild, hurtling, stone-carved journey deep into the earth, and Harry held the edge of the car with both hands and felt the cold air rushing past his face, and the whole experience was so thoroughly unlike anything else he'd ever done that he let himself feel it fully, the velocity and the dark and the enormous alive sense of it. Far below the city's streets, in vaults carved into the bedrock, his family's history sat in the dark, waiting. The letter was in a small cedar box with a wax seal in the shape of a phoenix. Harry opened it alone, in the vault, with Ragnar waiting at a tactful distance. My darling boy, if you're reading this, you burned. First real burn, I mean, not the little sparks you made when you were happy, not the glow. The actual fire. I need you to know some things quickly because whoever you're with right now probably doesn't know much more than you do, and the ones who do know, and I'm talking about one specific old man who is very wise and very wrong, will try to tell you the story in a way that serves them. Here is the truth, the phoenixes are very old. Older than wand magic, older than the ministry, older than almost every institutional thing in our world. They don't choose to bond with a human the way people say. It's inheritance. Deep blood inheritance. The Peverills, the Potters, James's line goes back to the original family, the ones who ran with phoenixes like other people ran with dogs. Most of the line lost the blood over centuries. You didn't. This means a few things. You won't be destroyed by fire, you probably know that already. You'll heal faster than other people, sometimes much faster. Your magic doesn't work the way other people's does, it's not stored and channeled, it's generated. You are a source, not a conduit. You may eventually be able to travel the way phoenixes travel, though that takes time. It also means Dumbledore is afraid of you. Not because you're dangerous. Because you're sovereign. Because no one binds a phoenix and there is no binding in existence that a true phoenix heir cannot burn through, eventually. He knew this. He put the binding on anyway. He planned to manage the timing of your growth, to make you powerful on his schedule, aimed in his direction. I am so angry about this, Harry. I need you to know that. I am so furious on your behalf, and I'm so sorry I'm not there to tell you myself. You don't owe anyone your fire. Not Dumbledore. Not the ministry. Not the prophecy. Not the role they've written for you. You are 7 years old and you burned your own chains off. That's the whole story, my darling. Everything else is just details. I love you more than anything I ever did or was or could have been. Your mum. Harry stood in the firelit vault, in the deep dark beneath London, with his mother's letter in his hands, and the glow came back, not fire, not burning, just warmth, in his hands and his chest, steady as a heartbeat. He breathed through it. Let it run. Let it be his. Then he folded the letter carefully, tucked it inside his shirt against his chest, and went back to where Ragnarok was waiting. "I need books," Harry said. "On Phoenix inheritance. On the original families. On wizarding law as it applies to wards, bindings, and the legal authority to place them on a minor." He paused. "And I'll need to make arrangements for where I'm living. I don't think I'm going back to Privet Drive." Ragnarok, who had been watching him with those steady amber eyes, made a note in his ledger. "We have a list of properties under the Potter estate management," he said, as if this were entirely normal, as if 7-year-olds presented themselves to Gringotts every morning demanding legal information and alternative housing. "Small ones, unoccupied, maintained by the estate fund." "That would be useful," Harry said. "There is also," Ragnarok said, slowly, "a traditional goblin arrangement, an account of standing, for individuals who qualify for it. It provides access to our network of information brokers, magical merchants outside the minister-registered economy, and certain legal resources." He set down his pen. "Gringotts has not offered this arrangement to a wizard in 300 years. Harry looked at him. "Are you offering it now?" Ragnarok set his hands flat on the desk, deliberate and formal. "Phoenix blood is a very old magic," he said. "And Gringotts has very long memory." He met Harry's eyes. "We remember who we have dealt with honestly. And we remember who has dealt honestly with us." Harry held out his hand across the ledger. It was glowing very faintly, warm gold, and he didn't try to stop it. Ragnarok looked at Harry's hand for a moment. Then he shook it. Outside, through miles of stone and city, the July sun was climbing, and Harry Potter, who was 7 years old and had burned through his chains and ridden a mine cart to the center of the earth and read his dead mother's letter and made an alliance with a goblin bank director before lunchtime, was just getting started. He sent Petunia a letter from the bank's owl post. It said, "I'm safe. I found what I needed. I won't be home for dinner. I won't be home for quite a while. Thank you for the biscuit tin. Harry." Petunia Evans Desley received it at number 4 while her husband was at work and her son was eating crisps in front of the television, and she read it standing at the kitchen window in the afternoon light, and she didn't tell Vernon, and she didn't call anyone, and she looked out at the ash rings where her roses had been for a long, quiet moment. Then she went and put the kettle on. 340 miles away, in his circular office in Hogwarts, a series of instruments began to spin and chime, and one of them, a small silver device shaped like a closed fist, suddenly spread open its fingers, reached out, and then went very, very still. Albus Dumbledore set down his quill. He looked at the device for a long moment. Beside him, his phoenix watched too, turning its golden head. "Well," Dumbledore said, very quietly. He picked up his quill again. But his hand wasn't quite steady. Chapter 2, The Education of a Phoenix. The flat was above a greengrocer in Covent Garden. It was small, 2 rooms and a bathroom, with windows that faced an alley, and it smelled like the vegetables from the shop below, earthy and faintly sweet, which Harry didn't mind at all. The walls were pale yellow going to cream at the edges, and the floorboards creaked in a sequence he memorized in the first hour, and the kitchen had a gas hob with a pilot light that needed relighting every few days. Ragnarok had arranged it through a property management company that handled several Potter holdings in London, a company staffed entirely by people who had, apparently, signed enough magical contracts with Gringotts to ensure their absolute discretion. The property manager who handed over the keys was a small, gray-haired woman named Mrs. Fitch, no relation, she said, to any fiches Harry might encounter in the magical world, a statement Harry filed as meaningless for now, and she looked at Harry the way most adults looked at him in the first 30 seconds, with that slight adjustment of expression that meant she'd been expecting someone older, taller, more obviously capable of handling his own affairs. Then she looked at him for another 2 seconds and handed over the keys without comment. Harry liked her immediately. There was, in the flat, a bookshelf. Empty when he arrived, it was not empty for long. Ragnarok had provided, through the Gringotts' account of standing, a list of text suppliers and private magical booksellers in London, not the Flourish and Blots in Diagon Alley, which was ministry adjacent and monitored, but smaller dealers, the kind that ran out of back rooms and sent orders by non-ministry owl, the kind that sold books the establishment would rather stay out of children's hands. Not dark books, not cursed libraries. Just comprehensive ones. The kind that told you things without deciding first what you were ready to hear. Harry spent his first week in the flat making lists of what he didn't know and systematically acquiring the means to fix that. He was, as he'd told Ragnarok, working on understanding what he was. His mother's letter had given him a framework, but a framework was only useful once you had material to hang on it, and the material, Phoenix inheritance, the Peveril line, the original magical families, the pre-ministry history of Britain's magical communities, turned out to be both fascinating and comprehensively buried. You could find it in fragments. A footnote in a history of the Wisengamot. A chapter in an out-of-print genealogy text. A whole section in a Goblin-published encyclopedia that the ministry had apparently tried to buy up and suppress in 1921, which you could only obtain from a specific dealer in Knockturn Alley's less threatening end. He bought everything. He read everything. He cross-referenced with the focus of someone twice his age and the appetite of someone who'd been kept intellectually starved for years, and he took notes in a series of cheap exercise books from the newsagent on the corner, and by the end of the second week he had filled 3 of them and had assembled a picture that made Dumbledore's behavior make, in a cold sort of way, complete sense. The history went like this. The Peverils were the founding family, the ones the legend of the Deathly Hallows was grafted onto because people needed stories with objects in them, because pure power in a bloodline was harder to narrativize than 3 magical artifacts. The truth the legends glossed over was simpler and stranger. The Peverils had been, for at least 12 generations, Phoenix bonded. Not in the familiar way, not the way Dumbledore's Fawkes was bonded, the traditional magical familiar relationship, one Phoenix to one wizard, temporary and chosen. Something earlier than that. Something the goblins called ignis sanguis, blood fire, a deepening of the bond over so many generations that the Phoenix nature had moved from association into inheritance. It meant, as Harry's mother had written, that he wasn't a wizard who happened to have a Phoenix connection. He was something different in category. His magic didn't sit in a core the way other witches and wizards described, that reservoir analogy teachers apparently used in first-year classes, magic as a tank that you drew from and refilled. Harry's was more like a furnace. Not a tank. A source. It generated continuously, it ran hot, and the only limits on what he could do were the limits of his own knowledge and his body's capacity to channel what he was making. The binding Dumbledore had placed on him at 14 months hadn't suppressed his magic exactly. It had built walls around the furnace. It had contained the output while the source kept running, and 6 years of contained pressure explained, Harry thought, why when the binding finally cracked it had been so total, so immediate, so complete. Not a gradual weakening. A detonation. He wrote, the binding didn't just suppress. It accumulated. Everything it held back was still there, waiting. He underlined it twice. The books also told him that Phoenix inheritance was not, historically, well documented in the ministry's official records because the ministry had a consistent and well-established institutional habit of managing information that complicated its own authority. A person who was genuinely sovereign, whose magic was not contingent on ministry-registered wands, ministry-approved training, ministry-sanctioned schools, was deeply inconvenient for a body whose power rested substantially on controlling magical education and licensing. This was not new information, exactly. Harry had, at 7, already absorbed enough political reality from the Gringotts briefings to understand that the ministry was a power structure with all the standard interests of power structures. But seeing it documented, seeing the actual legislative history, the Wand Act of 1692, the educational statutes of 1714, the trace implementation in 1749, made the shape of it very clear. They had built a system and they called the system civilization, and anyone who existed outside the system's categories was a problem to be solved. He wrote, "Dumbledore didn't bind me for the greater good. He bound me because the greater good, as he defines it, requires the system to function, and I am outside the system's categories." He paused, tapping his pen. He might not even know that's why he did it. The most dangerous kind of wrong is the kind that feels virtuous. He looked at that last sentence. Felt it land somewhere true and stay there. He discovered his abilities empirically, which was the only way he knew how to do anything. The flat had a back alley access door, and at 3 in the morning when the Covent Garden Market delivery lorries were the only sound, Harry went out to the alley with his exercise book and methodically worked out what he could do. The fire was most obvious. It came easily and naturally, responsive to intention in a way that other kinds of magic, the occasional accidental things that had happened throughout his childhood, the vanishing glass at the zoo, the instant regrowth of his hair, had never been. He could call it to his palm like lighting a match, hold it there, change its size, change its color. Phoenix fire, the book said, ran gold-orange in its natural state. Harry's did. But it could be tuned. He discovered this by accident on the 4th night, reaching for the flame while he was thinking about something protective, and it came gold-white and hummed against his palm with a different quality to it entirely, warmer and steadier, and when he held it near the alley wall it seemed to illuminate something in the brick that wasn't visible otherwise, not hidden writing or magic marks but simply depth, reality, the actual there-ness of the thing. Healing was less dramatic and more useful. He'd cut himself in the kitchen, a bread knife slipping while he was making toast, and watched the wound close in approximately 40 seconds. Not instantly, not magically narrated instantly, but fast. He'd pressed the edges together and felt the warmth come and the skin had simply decided to be fine. He tested it again, more carefully, with a deliberate small cut on his forearm, and measured the time, 38 seconds. He wrote it down. He could also feel things he couldn't see. Not see the future things, not visions. More like, spatial awareness, but for magical traces. Standing in Diagon Alley, he could feel the shape of active enchantments on the shops around him the way you could feel the air pressure change before a thunderstorm, a wordless information about what was present and where. He found wards on buildings. He found protective charms. He found, once, walking past a nondescript door between a cauldron shop and a second-hand robe dealer, the distinct cold signature of something old and dark and unpleasant behind the wood, and he wrote that down and gave the address to Ragnarok, who had looked at it with an expression of professional satisfaction and said something quietly to an associate. 3 days later the door between the cauldron shop and the robe dealer wasn't there anymore. He didn't ask what it had been. He stored the interaction as evidence of something about the Gringotts alliance. They were effective, they were efficient, and they had their own reasons. In September he started going to the magical world more deliberately. Not Hogwarts, that wasn't until he was 11, and the thought of walking into an institution on someone else's terms, without preparation, still made something in him instinctively resistant. But Diagon Alley, and the edges of it, and eventually the parts of Knockturn Alley that were seedy rather than genuinely dangerous, and the magical community that existed in London outside the commercial strip, the neighborhood of witches and wizards who'd lived above Muggle shops for a century and bought their daily profits from a corner newsagent who kept them under the counter and had opinions about everything. He found a woman named Arabella Fitch, different Fitch, same name, no relation to his property manager, apparently Fitch was just common, who ran a tutoring service for magical children out of her kitchen in Hackney. She was a squib, the daughter of a magical family, no magic of her own, which had, she told Harry with a dryness that he liked immediately, made her very motivated to understand magic as a theoretical and practical discipline even if she couldn't perform it directly. "Dumbledore placed me near your previous address, years ago," she said, on the second afternoon Harry came to her kitchen. They were drinking tea, she was correcting a 12-year-old's essay on transfiguration theory, and Harry had been reading one of her books on magical law. "I knew about you. I was never going to say anything to anyone who'd have passed it upward." "Why not?" Harry asked. She put her pen down. Looked at him over her glasses, which were held together at one hinge with a piece of wire. "Because I know what Dumbledore does with boys he thinks need managing," she said. And I know what boys who get managed by him become. She picked up her pen again. Besides, you're Lily's boy. Did you know my mother? She was the best student I ever taught, Arabella said. Before the Hogwarts letter. I taught her from when she was 6 until she was 11, same as I'm teaching you now. She was the one who found me. She was 8 and she'd set her school's chemistry lab on fire, not on purpose, accidental magic, perfectly normal, and the school sent her home, and her parents didn't know what to do, and she turned up at my door because she'd seen my name in. She stopped. Shook her head. That's a longer story. The point is she had your same habit. Finding the door herself, instead of waiting for someone to open it. Harry was quiet for a moment. Will you teach me? I've been teaching you for 6 days, Arabella pointed out. You've read 12 of my books and asked better questions than most of my adult students. The teaching is already happening. I'm just formalizing it. She pushed a transfiguration text across the table. It was a 7th-year level text, dense with theory, nothing simplified. Start at chapter 4, she said. Chapter 1 through 3 are things you already know. Don't tell me how, I can tell you do. Start at 4 and tell me when something stops making sense. Harry opened the book. Something in him, the furnace, the warmth, the deep underlying hum that was always present now that the binding was gone, leaned toward the text with undisguised appetite. He didn't stop until she made him go home for dinner. He met his first friend in October, in the Diagon Alley bookshop. He'd gone to Flourish and Blots, cautiously, aware that it was more monitored than the backroom suppliers but that it also had a better selection of certain standard texts, and he needed the standard book of spells grade 3 for a spell Arabella had referenced, and a girl had crashed into him near the charms section. Not literally, she'd been walking backward while reading, which Harry appreciated as a mode of transport, and had collided with the display stand he was standing next to. They'd both grabbed for the falling books and ended up holding the same volume between them. She had brown bushy hair and very serious dark eyes and the expression of someone who had just done something she considered undignified and was already calculating the fastest route to recovering from it. Sorry, she said. I was reading. I noticed, Harry said. What was it? She blinked, apparently expecting a different response. Magical Theory by Adalbert Waffling. I've already read it but there was a footnote on page 214 about pre-wand casting methodologies and I wanted to check whether the citation actually matched the source text he listed. Does it? Harry asked. No, she said, with satisfaction. He misquoted. The source text says may generate wandless effects, and Waffling writes it as will generate, which completely changes the argument. She put the book back on the shelf. It's quite sloppy for someone considered a foundational theorist. Citation errors in foundational texts are how wrong things become received wisdom, Harry said. She looked at him with those serious eyes. Yes. Exactly. A pause. You're very young to be in Flourish and Blots alone. So are you, Harry pointed out. My parents are next door looking at stationery supplies. I'm Hermione Granger. She held out her hand with the slight formality of someone who'd been told to introduce themselves properly. Harry Potter. He shook it. She didn't look at his forehead. She looked at his face, and her expression cycled through several things, recognition, recalibration, and then a sort of decisive settling that Harry would come to know well. Hermione Granger dealt with unexpected information by classifying it and continuing. You're in Diagon Alley alone, she said. Without an adult. I live nearby, Harry said. I do this fairly regularly. You're not at school. Neither are you. We go to primary school, she said. I mean, Hogwarts. Or whatever the equivalent is. I got my letter this summer. She pulled it out of her bag, evidently she carried it everywhere, and Harry looked at it. Standard Hogwarts admittance letter, arrival September 1st, 4 years from now. My parents are Muggle, so we've been doing a lot of research. It's quite overwhelming, actually, the amount of things there are to understand. How long have you been doing research? Harry asked. 3 weeks. I've been doing it for 3 months, Harry said. I'll tell you what I know if you want. It's faster than working through it all from scratch. Hermione looked at him with an expression that Harry would later identify as the face she made when something turned out to be more interesting than she'd anticipated. All right, she said. I'll get my parents. The Grangers, Richard and Helen, both dentists, both deeply practical in the way that people who spent their professional lives solving concrete problems in people's mouths tended to be practical, were the first adults Harry had spoken to since Arabella, who treated him like a person with useful information rather than a situation to be managed. Richard Granger listened to Harry's explanation of the Hogwarts curriculum, the Diagon Alley supply lists, and the basic structure of magical Britain with the focused attention of someone taking notes in his head. Helen asked several questions about the educational standards and the accreditation of Hogwarts as an institution, which Harry answered honestly, including the parts where the answer was the ministry oversees it, which is not necessarily reassuring. Hermione listened to all of it with her chin in her hand and her eyes tracking every word, and when Harry finished she said, "The binding that you mentioned in passing, is that something that happens to other children?" "No," Harry said. "That was specific to me. Specific to what I am." She looked at him. "Which is what, exactly?" He considered, for about half a second, whether to tell her. Then he thought about what his mother had written, "They'll try to tell you the story in a way that serves them," and about Arabella's dry honesty and Ragnar's amber eyes and the quality of people who turned out to be useful, and the common thread in all of them, which was that they were people who could handle real information and preferred it to comfortable approximations. "Phoenix," he said. "Blood inheritance. Quite old." Hermione was quiet for a moment. "Like Fawkes," she said. "Dumbledore's Phoenix." "Not quite like Fawkes," Harry said. "Fawkes is a familiar bond. This is," he thought about his mother's letter, about the furnace analogy, about Ignis Sanguis. "This is deeper than that. It's in the blood. Can you show me?" Hermione asked. Harry opened his palm on the table between them. The fire came easily, gold-orange, steady, the way a candle holds its flame on a still night. Hermione leaned forward and looked at it with an expression of total, open-faced wonder that she didn't bother hiding. "That's remarkable," she said. It wasn't squealing or flinching. It was the same tone she'd used about the citation error, genuine, precise recognition of something interesting. Richard Granger looked at the fire in his restaurant booth and said, "Does that hurt you?" "No," Harry said. "It feels like," he searched for the right comparison. "It feels like breathing. Like something that was held in, out." Helen Granger nodded as if this was medically comprehensible. "Like a restricted airway clearing," she said. "That makes physiological sense." Harry liked the Grangers enormously. Hermione started coming to Arabella's kitchen twice a week. She had, Arabella told Harry privately, the best theoretical instinct for magic she'd seen in a non-magical student. Her spells were clean and precise, and she got frustrated when they weren't, and that frustration was productive rather than paralyzing. "She'll be extraordinary," Arabella said. "I know," Harry said. He'd known since the bookshop. The two of them studied with the focused intensity of children who discovered the pleasure of actually being challenged. Hermione pulled Harry toward theory, toward the why of things, toward a rigorous understanding of magical mechanics that Harry's more instinctive approach sometimes skipped over. Harry pulled Hermione toward the pragmatic, toward the what now, toward trusting her own judgment when the textbook answer wasn't sufficient for the actual situation in front of her. By November, Hermione could produce a wandless Lumos that held for 30 seconds. Harry could produce it indefinitely, which he didn't tell her because he suspected she'd go quiet in that way she had when she was processing something difficult, and he didn't want her to feel behind. She wasn't behind. She was exceptional. She just existed on a different scale. He also didn't tell Hermione everything. He told her most things, the Gringotts alliance, the politics, the broad strokes of what he was working toward. But his mother's letter he kept to himself, not out of secrecy but out of something that felt more like privacy. Some things you carry alone, not because you're hiding them but because they're yours. Winter arrived and brought two things, his 8th birthday passing quietly with Arabella's homemade cake and Hermione's gift of an annotated magical history text she'd found in a second-hand shop in Southwark, and a visit from a ministry official. Harry assessed from behind the slightly open door at the top of the greengrocer stairs, about 40, with a name tag that said D. Croker and the slightly rumpled look of someone from a department that didn't have to maintain appearances. Not an Auror. Not magical law enforcement. Something else. The man knocked on Harry's door. He knocked again. He looked at the door with an air of professional patience and said, to apparently no one, "I know you're there. The building's temperature is about 4 degrees warmer than the street and you were baking 30 minutes ago." Harry opened the door. He'd been, in fact, making toast, but the principal stood. Croker looked at him. The look lasted slightly longer than most adults' double takes. "The Unspeakables, Department of Mysteries," he said. "My name is Croker. I'm not here officially. I'm here because we detected an uninstructed wandless fire working in a residential property 2 months ago and I've been trying to locate its source, and I've found it." He paused. "May I come in?" "Tell me why you're not here officially," Harry said. Croker considered. "Because if I were here officially, I'd be obligated to file a report that would reach desks I'd prefer it not reach. And because what I want to say to you is better said as one person to another than as an institution to an irregularity." Harry stepped back from the door. "Let him in." Croker sat at Harry's kitchen table and looked, without invasive interest but with undisguised thoroughness, at the bookshelves, the exercise books, the evidence of 8 months of systematic self-education. He accepted a cup of tea. "You're 8 years old," he said. "I really am going to start charging for that observation," Harry said. Croker laughed, short and genuine. "Right. I'll skip it in future." He wrapped his hands around the mug. "I'm going to tell you something the Department of Mysteries has known for 30 years and kept from the ministry, because the ministry would have made it into a policy, and policy is the worst possible response to what I'm about to say." Harry sat across from him. Waited. "Phoenix inheritance is real and it's been in the Potter line for 11 generations, Croker said. "We've tracked it. There have been 8 others before you, going back to 1420. None of them were as strong a manifestation as your blood work suggests. I ran the numbers from your Gringotts registration, they share that data with us under a 50-year-old information treaty, but the pattern is clear." He looked at Harry directly. "The last one before you was your great-great-great-grandfather, Edmund Potter. He burned his first fire at 9. He was dead at 31. Killed by the British wizarding government of his era for," Croker's voice went dry, "political instability." Harry was quiet for a moment. "They killed him. They feared him. Which came to the same thing." Croker turned his mug in his hands. "Dumbledore knows this history. He knows the full documented list. I believe it's why he placed the binding, not entirely to control you, but also, in his way, to protect you. A Phoenix heir who comes into power gradually, under guidance, is less threatening to institutional structures than one who arrives fully formed, ungoverned, uncontrollable." He met Harry's eyes. "He was protecting you and managing you simultaneously, which is very Dumbledore. The two were inseparable in his mind." "That doesn't make it his decision," Harry said. "No," Croker agreed. "It doesn't." They sat in the quiet kitchen with the winter dark outside and the greengrocer shutting up below, the clatter of crates being brought in. "Why are you telling me?" Harry asked. "Because you need to know the historical context, and no one else was going to give it to you without an agenda attached." Croker finished his tea. "And because in about 3 years you're going to walk into Hogwarts, and when you do, Dumbledore is going to try to shape what you become, and I'd rather you went in with your eyes open." "They were already open," Harry said. Croker looked at him, This small, serious, self-possessed 8-year-old in a flat above a greengrocer, surrounded by evidence of a systematic self-education that most adults would never attempt, and something passed across his face that might have been, under other circumstances, admiration. "I'm starting to see that," he said. He left without asking for anything, without offering anything conditional, without placing any demands on Harry's future. He left a small card with a single line, D. Croker, should you need a witness who isn't affiliated. Harry put it in his exercise book. The years passed the way years do when you're busy. Not quickly exactly, but densely, each month layered with things learned and mastered and built upon. He turned 9 and Hermione gave him an encyclopedia of magical creatures, and they spent 2 weeks reading it together and arguing about the classification systems. He turned 10 and Arabella formally declared him the most advanced non-Hogwarts student she'd ever taught and presented him with a handwritten note in an envelope sealed with red wax saying as much, which Harry kept. He went back to Diagon Alley regularly, not always to buy things, sometimes just to be in the magical world, to feel its shape around him and understand how it worked through accumulated observation. He watched how people moved, who deferred to whom, which families walked through as if the street belonged to them and which ones moved with the careful economy of people who'd learned to take up less space. He watched the way magical Britain sorted itself by blood status, not in any official capacity, not openly, but in who got the good spot at the apothecary counter, who got the civil greeting from the robe shop owner, who got ignored. He wrote about it in his exercise books. Not angrily. Analytically. He was building a picture. He also, by his 9th year, developed enough control over his abilities that the fire was as natural to him as breathing and the healing was a background fact of his physical existence, and the spatial sense, the ability to feel magical traces, had expanded into something richer and more complex. He could, standing in Diagon Alley, read the history of enchantments on a building. Not the story history, not who cast what and when, but the texture of them, the accumulated layers, old magic under new, like reading geological strata. He was standing in the alley one afternoon in his 10th summer, doing exactly that, feeling the layers on Ollivanders, which was the most texturally interesting building on the street, centuries of wand magic embedded in the walls like rings in a tree, when he became aware that he was being watched. He'd known for 20 minutes. He'd been waiting for whoever it was to either approach or give up. They gave up. He turned in time to see the hem of a deep blue robe disappearing around the corner toward the leaky cauldron. He didn't follow. There wasn't a point, they hadn't done anything, they hadn't approached, and whoever it was would try again. People always tried again. He did note that the robe had been very fine, the kind of fine that was old money, not new, and that the person wearing it had been watching him with the quality of attention that meant they'd been looking for him specifically, not just glancing at a child standing alone in Diagon Alley. He added it to his running list of things to watch. 2 weeks before his 11th birthday, Hermione came to the flat with a new copy of Hogwarts, a history, which she'd annotated in 3 colors, and a plate of shortbread from her mother, and the expression she wore when she had something to say that she'd been thinking about carefully. They sat on the kitchen floor, the table was currently covered in Harry's notes on wizarding constitutional law, and ate shortbread, and Hermione said, "Are you ready?" Harry looked up. "For Hogwarts?" "For all of it." She gestured at the notes, the books, the whole accumulated architecture of 3 years of work. "You know things most 7th years don't know. You could walk in there and not play by any of the rules they expect you to play by, and there's nothing they could do about it." "That's not quite the goal," Harry said. She raised her eyebrows. "The goal isn't to be outside their rules," Harry said. "The goal is to make the rules irrelevant to me. That's different." He picked up a piece of shortbread. "Being outside their rules means they can still define me by my opposition to them. I don't want to be defined by them at all." Hermione was quiet for a moment, thinking about this. "You want to walk in as yourself," she said. "Not as a reaction to anything." "Exactly." She nodded. It landed. "Dumbledore will try," she said. "He'll have a plan." "He always has a plan," Harry said. "That's fine. So do I. Outside, the London summer was making the street hazy with heat, and somewhere a few buildings over a radio was playing something. Hermione started humming unconsciously, and Harry sat on the floor of his flat above the greengrocer and ate shortbread and thought about what was coming, and the warmth in his chest was steady as it had been for 3 years now, banked and patient and entirely, completely his. 2 weeks. Then the letters. Then everything. Chapter 3, Terms and Conditions. The first letter arrived on a Tuesday. Harry was making porridge when the owl came, a tawny, self-important bird that tapped the window with the energy of something that had been told its errand was important and had taken this to heart. Harry opened the window, let it in, fed it a piece of toast crust while he unrolled the letter, and read it standing at the hob with one hand still holding the wooden spoon. Dear Mr. Potter, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Standard language. He'd read it in Hermione's copy 2 years ago and had quietly obtained a second copy through Arabella's contacts just to familiarize himself with the format. The supply list followed on a second sheet, standard first-year equipment, standard texts, all of which he either owned already or had read in superior editions. He set that sheet aside. The tawny owl was still on his windowsill, watching him eat porridge with the alert patience of a bird expecting a response. Harry gave it another piece of toast and said, "There'll be a reply in a moment," and the owl blinked at him in a way that suggested it was accustomed to people being more impressed by its arrival. He'd barely set the Hogwarts letter down when the second owl appeared. This one was different. It was larger, white, and moved with a particular deliberateness that Harry had come to associate, through a year of observing the post owls in Diagon Alley, with ministry or headmaster correspondence. Official birds, trained differently. They didn't tap windows. They waited, and the waiting had weight to it. Harry opened the window. The white owl stepped in and held out its leg with ceremonial patience. The second letter was sealed with purple wax, the Hogwarts crest pressed into it, and beneath the crest a second seal in a different color, personal correspondence, not institutional. Deep blue. The kind of wax seal that had its own magic woven in, that would know if it had been opened by the wrong hands. It opened easily for Harry. He supposed it would. Dear Harry, I write to you on this occasion not merely as headmaster of Hogwarts but as someone who has known of you since before your birth, and who has thought of your welfare, I hope you will believe me, with genuine care throughout the years of your childhood. I am aware that you have not been living at Privet Drive for some time. I am aware that you have been pursuing your own education through channels outside the standard magical establishment. I want you to know that I do not begrudge you this independence, it speaks to qualities that I always knew you possessed. However, as you prepare to enter Hogwarts, I feel it is important that we establish certain understandings. Your position in our world is unique, and the attention that comes with it can be, as I know you must be beginning to appreciate, both powerful and dangerous. I have some experience navigating these waters, and I offer that experience, freely and without conditions, as a resource available to you. I would ask only a few things in the interest of your safety and the safety of those around you. First, that you conduct yourself within the established rules and customs of Hogwarts, as all students are expected to do. Second, that certain information about your specific abilities remains, for now, between us, for reasons I would be very happy to explain in person. Third, that you come to my office directly upon arrival, before the sorting, so that we might speak privately. These are small things, Harry. I ask them because I care what happens to you, and because the road ahead is complicated in ways that will become clear in time. Yours sincerely, Albus Dumbledore, Headmaster, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Harry read the letter once, carefully, all the way through. Then he read it again, more slowly, marking specific phrases in his head the way Arabella had taught him to parse legal language. Note what it says, note what it implies, and note very carefully what it avoids saying directly. Certain information about your specific abilities remains, for now, between us. I ask them because I care what happens to you. The road ahead is complicated in ways that will become clear in time. He'd managed a binding on Harry for 6 years without telling Lily Potter. He'd placed a 7-year-old in a home that had, at its absolute warmest, been a cold tolerance, without explanation or apology. He'd been watching Harry for the past 4 years of his self-directed education. Harry had no doubt about that. Croaker's visit alone confirmed sufficient surveillance, and in 4 years he had not once made direct contact, had not offered support or resources or so much as a formal acknowledgement, had simply watched. And now, on the cusp of Hogwarts, with Harry's abilities fully developed and his mind fully formed, now the old man wanted to talk. Not even talk. Agree to terms. Harry put the letter flat on the table. He looked at it for about 30 seconds. Then he went to his bookshelf, found his box of good parchment, the proper magical kind, not the exercise book variety, sat down, uncapped his ink, and wrote. He wrote for about 15 minutes, reading back as he went, adjusting once. Then he folded the parchment, sealed it with his own wax, a small pot of it he'd bought in Diagon Alley, amber, unsealed by magic, just good wax, and carried it to the window. The white owl was still on the sill. "This is for Dumbledore," Harry told it. "Thank you." The owl took the letter and was gone. He sent the reply to Hermione with his second owl, the small brown one he'd acquired in his 9th year from a dealer who'd described her as difficult, which had turned out to mean she had opinions about routes and wouldn't fly in bad weather, both of which Harry considered reasonable. And Hermione arrived at the flat an hour later with her own Hogwarts acceptance letter in hand and an expression of excitement she was trying to contain into something more measured and not entirely succeeding. "I got mine," she said, walking in and setting the supply list on the table before she'd even taken her coat off. "First-year book list is quite limited, isn't it? I've already read 5 of these and I own better versions of 2 others." She looked at the amber-sealed envelope on his table. "What's that?" "Dumbledore's reply to his conditions." She went still. Sat down across from him. "What did you write?" "The truth," Harry said. "That I'd be coming to Hogwarts on my own terms and not anyone else's. That my abilities aren't a secret to be managed between us, they're mine, and I'll discuss them on my timeline, not his. That I'd be happy to visit his office after the sorting, not before, and only if there was something genuinely useful to discuss." He paused. "And that I'd burned his first letter." Hermione looked at him for a long moment. "You burned his letter?" "The one with the conditions, yes." "How did he respond?" Harry picked up the amber-sealed envelope. "Haven't opened it yet. Waiting for you to get here." This was the right thing to say. He saw it in the slight softening of her expression, the way she leaned forward on her elbows. He broke the seal. "Dear Harry, I see. I will not pretend I am not surprised, though perhaps surprise is the wrong word. I think, on reflection, that I always knew this conversation would happen in some form. I want to say something plainly, because I suspect you'll appreciate plain speaking over diplomatic construction. I made a decision about your early life that was wrong. Not in intention, I will stand by the intention, which was to keep you alive long enough to make your own choices, but in method, and in the degree to which I substituted my judgment for your parents and for yours. I know you know about the binding. I know you know I placed it. I am not going to insult your intelligence by defending it to you now, at a distance, in a letter. What I will say is that what is coming, and something is coming, Harry, something that concerns you more directly than anything you've yet encountered, is genuinely complicated, and I am, despite everything, genuinely on your side. Come to Hogwarts. Come on your terms. I'll be there. Albus Dumbledore. Harry set the letter down. Hermione read it from across the table. He'd angled it so she could, and they were both quiet for a moment. He admitted it, Hermione said, with some surprise. He admitted the what, Harry said. Not the why. Not completely. But it's more than you expected. Harry thought about it honestly. Yes, he admitted. It is. He picked up the letter again. He's smart. Smart enough to know that trying to manage me with charm and misdirection doesn't work anymore, if it ever would have, so he's trying honesty as an approach. Or a version of it. He set it down. The bit about something that concerns you more directly is a hook. He wants me to come in curious. Are you? Hermione asked. About what's coming? Harry considered. Yes. But I'd already be curious without the prompt, and I'd already be coming to Hogwarts, so the hook doesn't change my behavior. Which he probably knows. He gathered the letters together. He's playing a long game, Dumbledore. The question is whether he's playing it against me or alongside me. How do you find out? Watch what he does when I do things he didn't anticipate, Harry said simply. People reveal themselves through their reactions to surprises. He put the letters in his box. Right. Supply list. Which books do you still need? Hermione, who had clearly wanted to discuss Dumbledore for at least another 20 minutes, redirected herself with visible effort. The Standard Book of Spells Grade 1, she said. I have my own annotated notes, but the examiners might reference the specific text. I have 2 copies, Harry said. Take one. 3 days later, a third owl. This one Harry hadn't expected. Small, dusty gray, with a note tied to its leg in handwriting that slanted hard to the right and had the quality of someone who wrote quickly and didn't care much about the result. Mr. Potter, I am writing in my capacity as deputy headmistress and your head of house, depending on which house you're sorted into, in which latter case, this letter is premature. However, I have been made aware, through channels I won't specify, that you are not a standard entry. I prefer to deal with non-standard situations directly rather than waiting for them to become disruptions. If you have questions about Hogwarts rules, expectations, or the specifics of first-year arrangements, I am available by reply. If you do not, you need not respond. I simply want you to know that there is an adult at Hogwarts who prefers facts to surprises. Professor McGonagall, Deputy Headmistress, Head of Gryffindor House. Harry read this with considerably more warmth than he'd read Dumbledore's. He wrote back within the hour. Professor McGonagall, I do have questions. Not about rules, I've read the Hogwarts Charter and I'm comfortable with the disciplinary structure. My questions are more practical. First, are students permitted to maintain and use magical texts outside the standard curriculum? The library's restricted section policy is unclear on personal ownership versus borrowing. Second, is there a formal process for independent study arrangements, or is the curriculum fixed? Third, who is the potions professor, and is there published academic work I could read before term starts? Harry Potter. Her reply came the same evening. Mr. Potter, personal ownership of advanced texts is permitted provided they are not used in class to disrupt the standard curriculum. Flaunting superior materials is considered bad form, though I suspect you already know this. Independent study arrangements exist but require approval from the relevant head of house and subject teacher. Approval is not guaranteed. The potions professor is Severus Snape. His published academic work is limited to one paper in Potions Quarterly, 1981, on the theoretical modification of wolfsbane. He is not known for making it easy to find. I will add, he is also not known for making it easy to be a student in his class. Come prepared. Professor McGonagall. Harry found the Potions Quarterly paper through a Gringotts contact within 2 days. It was, he thought, reading it twice and then a third time more carefully, quite brilliant. Dense and technical and completely uninterested in being accessible, written for an audience of one, and that audience was apparently the author himself. The theoretical framework for modified wolfsbane was sound and the methodology was innovative, and the conclusion was, if you followed the logic all the way to its actual implication, about 15 years ahead of where mainstream potions research currently was. He wrote very detailed notes. He was going to need them. The last month before Hogwarts had a particular quality, the feeling of a door ahead, not yet open, the whole shape of a thing about to change. Harry moved through it with the same steadiness he'd maintained for 4 years, buying what he still needed, finishing what he'd been reading, making sure the flat arrangements were solid for the school year. Mrs. Fitch would check in monthly. The Gringotts account was current. Arabella had 3 other students now and didn't need him there to keep running. He had a farewell dinner with the Grangers. Helen made pasta and Richard asked extremely detailed and sensible questions about the Hogwarts safety record that Harry answered as honestly as he could, which meant saying there were a few historical incidents that were concerning but that he'd be watching out for Hermione, which made Helen smile in a way that had several layers to it. Hermione walked with him to the tube afterward, and they stood on the platform waiting for the train and she said, "First years are sorted and then there's a feast, and then the prefects show the first years to the dormitories." She was reading from her annotated Hogwarts, a history, not because she'd forgotten but because the rhythm of reciting helped her think. The Sorting Hat looks into your mind. What you want, what you value, your character. I know, Harry said. What house do you think? She asked. Honestly? I think the hat will be confused, Harry said. And then I think we'll have a conversation. Hermione looked at him sideways. You can't have a conversation with the Sorting Hat. It thinks. It speaks. Those are the preconditions for conversation. Harry watched the train coming along the tunnel. Besides, it's been around for 1,000 years. I'm curious what it knows. Hermione was quiet for a moment. The train arrived in its rush of warm air. They got on. I'm nervous, Hermione said, into the rattle of the carriage. She said it simply, without apology for it, which Harry appreciated. I know, he said. That's reasonable. There's a lot of unknowns. You're not nervous. I'm alert, Harry said. There's a difference. Nervous means you're afraid of what might go wrong. Alert means you're paying attention to everything so you can respond to whatever happens. He considered. I've been alert for 4 years. It becomes baseline. She was quiet. Then, you'll be there. The whole time, Harry said. Obviously. September 1st, King's Cross, platform 9 3/4. He went through the barrier at 9:15, while most families were still arriving, because there was no point in being in the crowd when you could be before it. The Hogwarts Express was already there, long, gleaming scarlet, smelling of coal and something sweet and old, and the platform had that particular quality of magical space, slightly larger than it should be, slightly less subject to the ambient noise of the station beyond. He found a compartment near the middle of the train, stowed his trunk, including the expanded space section he'd had added by a Gringotts-connected luggage modifier, which contained considerably more books than a standard first-year trunk, and sat at the window with a book open on his lap, watching the platform fill. The families arriving were a cross-section of magical Britain in miniature. He watched the pureblood families first, identified by bearing as much as clothing, the slight formal quality, the self-possession, the way they moved through the crowd with the ease of people who'd always expected space to be made for them. 3 boys arrived together with parents who had the blonde certainty of the Malfoys. Harry had seen them in Diagon Alley before, moving through it like they owned it, which in some technical economic sense they partly did. He filed them away. He watched the first-generation magical families, the Muggleborns and Half-Bloods, arriving with that particular mixture of excitement and careful observation. He recognized it, he'd worn that expression himself, that first time in Diagon Alley, before he'd had 4 years of inhabiting the magical world to wear it smooth. He watched Hermione arrive with her parents, Richard with her trunk, Helen holding a list, Hermione herself already talking to a red-haired girl who'd stumbled on the platform steps. Harry watched Hermione catch the girl's arm, steady her, say something that made the girl laugh. There she was. Already making things work. A round-faced boy settled into Harry's compartment about 20 minutes before departure, looking apologetically at the empty seats. "Do you mind? Everywhere else is rather packed." "Help yourself," Harry said. "Neville," the boy said. Neville Longbottom. He had a toad in a small glass tank that he placed very carefully on the seat beside him. "This is Trevor. I nearly lost him at the barrier. Harry Potter." Neville went through the same double-take sequence as most people, eyes to forehead, slight adjustment. He did it faster than most and landed on something that was just, genuine, comfortable. "Right," he said. Yeah, I've heard of you. Obviously. Everyone has. He paused. Is it strange? Being, famous. I've barely been in the magical world, Harry said, which was not precisely untrue. So mostly no. I've been in it my whole life, Neville said, and it's still strange. He looked at Trevor. My gran says Hogwarts will be good for me. She says it like she's not entirely sure she believes it. Grans often say things like that, Harry said. What about your family? Are they? Neville stopped. Sorry. Everyone says your parents. I didn't mean to. It's fine, Harry said. It was, mostly. I live alone. Flat in London. He watched Neville process this without asking the 17 follow-up questions most people would ask, and appreciated it. Your gran might be right about Hogwarts. Or she might be wrong. You'll know pretty quickly. Neville considered this with the thoughtful expression of someone accustomed to sitting with uncertainty. I'm not great at magic, he said. So far. I can do it but I'm not, it's not consistent. Consistency comes with understanding the mechanics, Harry said. Not from doing it over and over the same wrong way. Neville looked at him. What do you mean? So Harry spent 40 minutes explaining the principles of magical channeling to Neville Longbottom, watching Neville's expression shift from polite listening to actual engagement, watching the moment when the theoretical model connected to something Neville had been trying to do and failing and not understanding why. It was, Harry thought, one of the more satisfying conversations he'd had in months. Hermione arrived mid-journey with the red-haired girl, Ginny Weasley, she said, first year, one of 6 boys and the only girl and evidently comfortable with Harry's existence in a way that suggested she'd been briefed by someone at home. She sat across from Harry and immediately joined the magical channeling conversation with a set of observations about her own accidental magic that were sharp and well articulated. The blonde Malfoy came by once, accompanied by 2 large boys who were clearly security in the way that people became security when they didn't have better ideas. He looked at Harry with an expression that had been practicing being assessing and had mostly achieved it. Potter, he said. Word is you've been living in the Muggle world. Word travels, Harry agreed. I'm Draco Malfoy. He said it with the particular weight of someone accustomed to the name doing work for him. I know, Harry said. Your father sits on the Hogwarts Board of Governors. Your family contributed the Eastern Library Wing restoration in 1987. Your mother is from the Black family, which makes you related to half the pure-blood families in Britain and 1 or 2 who aren't anymore. He met Malfoy's eyes. Was there something you wanted, or is this just reconnaissance? A silence, brief and telling. Malfoy's expression moved through several things, surprise, recalibration, a flash of something that might have been interest if it hadn't been pressed under the need to maintain composure. Just introducing myself, he said. Nice to meet you, Harry said pleasantly, and went back to his book. Malfoy left. Neville was watching Harry with an expression of quiet delight that he was trying to hide. Ginny was not trying at all. Hermione was looking at Harry with the expression she used when she was deciding whether to be pleased or concerned and hadn't finished deciding. They reached Hogwarts in the dark, which Harry thought was a deliberate choice, the school revealed to first years by boat, across water, at night, so that the first sight of it was maximum impact. He could see the thinking. And the thinking wasn't wrong. Hogwarts, at night, from the lake, was extraordinary. He let himself feel it, the full architectural reality of it, towers against a sky brilliant with stars, windows lit warm amber, the sense of something enormously old and enormously alive looking down at you as you approached across black water. It had presence the way very few places had presence. Harry, who was sensitive to the magical signature of spaces, felt the school's magic like weather, vast, complex, centuries deep, 100,000 spells and charms and enchantments layered together into something that was almost its own intelligence. He trailed his fingers in the water as the boats moved, feeling the lake's cold and the faint silvery magic of what lived in it, and the castle grew ahead of them, and he was, without qualification, glad to be here. The sorting happened in the great hall with its 1,000 candles and its enchanted ceiling showing the October night sky and its 4 long tables looking at the first years with the accumulated attention of 400 students who'd all done this themselves and remembered how it felt. The other first years were nervous in the expected ways. Harry was alert. He watched the hat get placed on head after head and sort each student with the particular speed that suggested it had made up its mind before it touched them, or very quickly after. Most sortings took 30 seconds. A few went to a minute. Hermione was Gryffindor inside 20 seconds, and she sat down at the table with the expression of someone who'd expected this and was still pleased by the confirmation. Neville was Gryffindor after about 45 seconds, and he walked to the table with a slight duck of his head that had relief in it. Potter, Harry. The hall did exactly what Hogwarts halls do when a famous name is called. It went very quiet, and the quiet had a particular quality, the specific silence of many people trying to look like they weren't staring while absolutely staring. Harry walked to the stool with even steps, sat down, and the hat was placed on his head. The dark of it was immediate and total, and then, well, said the hat. Here we are. It had a voice like old paper and deep water. Not quite a voice. An impression of one. I've been waiting for this one, it continued, with a quality that Harry identified as genuine interest rather than performance. You know, in 1,000 years of sorting, I've only had 4 Phoenix-touched students. One of them was a Hufflepuff. The other 3 argued with me. Did they get to pick their house? Harry asked, inside his own head, which was a slightly peculiar sensation. 2 of them did. One I won. He was furious about it. Which house? Slytherin. He came around eventually. They always do. A pause. You're different from the others, though. They had the inheritance but not the understanding. You came in knowing what you are, which is unusual for 11. Usually they're still working it out. The hat's attention moved through Harry's mind in a way he could feel, not invasive but comprehensive, like a library catalog running. Brave, obviously. Exceptionally intelligent. Loyal with real specificity, you don't give it easily but when you do it's absolute. Ambitious in the sense that you have a very clear view of what you want and a very detailed plan for getting there. So all 4 houses, then, Harry said. Well, that's the problem, isn't it? The hat sounded amused. Every house would take you. Every house would benefit from you. The interesting question isn't where you fit. It's where you'll do the most good. A pause. And where will give you the most interesting problems. You like problems. I like problems with solutions, Harry said. Not all problems have solutions. No, the hat agreed. But the ones worth having are the ones where you're not sure whether they do or not. Its attention shifted, settled. You know, your mother was Gryffindor. Your father was Gryffindor. Longbottom is Gryffindor. Granger is Gryffindor. You've built your foundational alliances there already, almost by instinct. I hadn't thought of it that way, Harry admitted. Most people don't notice they're sorting themselves before the hat gets to them, the hat said, and Harry felt the distinct impression of a smile, which was a strange thing to feel from a hat. But you're going to need people around you who aren't afraid of fire. And you're going to need to be around people who make you want to be the best version of yourself, not just the most powerful. The attention settled further, decisive. There's your answer. Gryffindor. The Gryffindor table made a noise that started as applause and became something slightly more complex when it went on and the hall stayed quiet longer than expected. Harry took the hat off, set it neatly on the stool, and walked to the Gryffindor table. He was aware, without looking, of Dumbledore watching from the high table. He sat down between Hermione and Neville and the feast appeared. The hat took almost 3 minutes, Hermione said, quiet and delighted. What did it say? It said I'd already sorted myself, Harry said, and reached for the potatoes. Dumbledore's speech was, as reported, full of warmth and gentle nonsense about the corridors being off-limits and Mr. Filch's list of prohibited items and the forbidden forest being forbidden. Harry listened and ate and watched the headmaster the way he'd learned to watch people, not overtly, not with the visible focus that made people self-conscious, but steadily, peripherally, gathering detail. Dumbledore was old in a way that was different from simply being elderly. There was weight to it. And watching him now, Harry could see what Croker had described and what his mother's letter had implied, the genuine care, actually genuine, the way he looked at the students with real warmth. It was the warmth that made the control more insidious, Harry thought. A cold manipulator was easy to resist. Someone who genuinely loved you and was wrong about you was significantly harder. At the end of the speech, Dumbledore's eyes found Harry's across the hall, brief and deliberate. Not challenging. Acknowledging. Harry met his gaze evenly and then went back to his food. Across the table, a red-haired boy, Ron Weasley, he'd gathered, Ginny's older brother, was looking at Harry with an expression of combined curiosity and evaluation. "You're really Harry Potter," Ron said, as if checking. "I really am," Harry agreed. "Fred and George, my brothers, they said you'd be mental. They said anyone famous that young has to be either brilliant or completely mental and usually both. Which do you think?" Harry asked. Ron considered him seriously. "Dunno yet," he said. "You want chess?" He produced a pocket set from somewhere. "After dinner," Harry said. Ron grinned, and it was an entirely natural grin, no performance in it. Harry liked him immediately. He had the quality of people who didn't know how to be anything other than what they were, which was rarer than it should be. Harry was heading for the Gryffindor Tower with the other first years when a prefect touched his arm lightly. "Headmaster would like a word," the prefect said, with the slightly apologetic expression of someone delivering a message they hadn't written. Harry thought about it for approximately 2 seconds. "Tell him I'll come by tomorrow morning," Harry said. "Before breakfast." The prefect blinked. "He said now." "I know what he said." Harry smiled pleasantly. "Tomorrow morning. Before breakfast. I'll come to his office." He looked at the prefect, who was genuinely stuck between two authority figures and clearly hadn't been trained for this. "It's fine. He'll understand." He went to Gryffindor Tower. In his circular office, Albus Dumbledore sat in the glow of his instrument collection and looked at the one small silver device that was still, and steady, and telling him nothing at all about the boy who had just walked past it for the first time. He picked up his quill. Set it down. Then, after a long moment, the corner of his mouth moved. It might have been a smile. It was complicated if it was. "Well," he said, to no one. "All right, then." The dormitory was quiet by midnight. Neville was asleep with Trevor's tank on his bedside table. Ron had achieved unconsciousness with the impressive speed of someone with no unresolved thoughts. 2 other boys, Dean Thomas, Seamus Finnegan, were out within 20 minutes of hitting the pillows. Harry lay in his 4-poster bed in the dark of Gryffindor Tower and felt the school around him, that vast complex magical signature, shifting and breathing the way old things breathe. He could feel the wards on the building, the specific warmth of them, the complicated accumulated trust of 1,000 years of people calling this place safe. Something in the magic was oriented toward him. Not watching, more like recognizing. Like a building acknowledging someone who belongs in it. He pressed his palm flat on the stone wall beside his bed and let the warmth come from his hand, just briefly, gold and quiet. The wall was warm under his palm. There you are, he thought, to the school, or to himself, or to nothing at all. He closed his eyes. He slept. Chapter 4, The Weight of a Name. He went to Dumbledore's office at 7:15, before the other first years were awake. The gargoyle at the base of the spiral staircase gave him a look that suggested it had opinions about early visitors. Harry said, "He's expecting me," and the gargoyle stepped aside with the reluctant air of something that had been told to cooperate and hadn't entirely agreed. The office was everything the books had suggested and slightly more. Circular, cluttered with instruments that moved and hummed and spun on their pedestals, shelves of peculiar objects with the dense layered magic of things that had been important for a long time. Portraits of previous headmasters on the walls, some of them awake and watching, some pretending to be asleep with varying degrees of commitment. A large claw-footed desk. 2 chairs angled toward each other in front of it. And the phoenix perch, empty. Harry noticed the empty perch first because it was where his attention went, a pull he couldn't entirely account for, and then he noticed Dumbledore standing behind his desk in deep purple robes, looking at Harry with an expression that had clearly been prepared and was now being revised in real time. "Harry," Dumbledore said. He gestured at the chairs. "Please." Harry sat. Not in the chair that was slightly lower, slightly less substantial, an old negotiation trick, positioning your guest as the petitioner. He took the other one. Dumbledore noticed. His expression revised itself again, one small layer at a time. "I appreciate you coming," Dumbledore said, sitting down. "I said I would," Harry said. "You did." Dumbledore folded his hands on the desk. He was wearing half-moon glasses and his eyes behind them were, Harry thought, the most genuinely intelligent eyes he'd encountered in a person so far. Old, amused, watchful, and carrying something underneath all three that was harder to name. Weight, maybe. The particular heaviness of someone who'd made a lot of decisions about other people's lives and lived with every one of them. "I imagine you have questions." "I have answers," Harry said. "I've been collecting them for 4 years. What I'm here to find out is what questions you think you need to answer to me." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. His fingers moved once on the desk, a small adjustment, and then stilled. "You're testing me." "I'm listening to what you choose to say first," Harry said. "That tells me more than the content." Another pause. Then Dumbledore smiled, and it was real. Harry could feel the difference between Dumbledore's performed warmth and this, which had something surprised in it, and something that was close to relief. "Your mother used to do something very similar," he said. "In her 7th year, when she'd decided she'd outgrown being managed by anyone. She sat exactly where you're sitting and listened to me in that same way." His voice was warm, genuinely warm, and the warmth had grief wound through it. "She was right, then, too." Harry let that sit. He didn't lean into it. The emotional leverage of comparing him to his mother was available to Dumbledore as a tool and he was using it, consciously or not. That didn't mean it wasn't also true. "The binding," Harry said. "Tell me what it actually was." Dumbledore removed his glasses and cleaned them with a small cloth, the gesture of a man who needed a moment and knew Harry would recognize it as such. He put them back on. It was a multi-layer suppression ward. Anchored to your blood, designed to contain the generation of your magic at approximately the level of a standard magical child. The intention was that you would develop naturally through Hogwarts, through standard curriculum, guided experience, the usual framework, and that the binding would dissolve on its own over the course of your education as you grew into your abilities. Instead it dissolved in one night when I was 7, Harry said. Yes. Dumbledore's gaze was steady. I felt it go. I knew you'd gone to Gringotts shortly after. I knew you'd found the flat. I watched you build your education. He paused. I chose not to intervene because once the binding was gone, there was no legitimate basis on which to impose structure on you. You were educating yourself at a standard that exceeded what Hogwarts could provide in the early years. Something moved through his expression, complicated. And because I thought, correctly, I believe, that any attempt at intervention would do more damage than absence. So you watched, Harry said. I watched, Dumbledore confirmed. And you sent a squib to watch before that, Harry said. Mrs. Fig. Yes. From before I burned. Yes. I won't pretend otherwise. Dumbledore's voice was even, without defensiveness. I placed Arabella Fig in Little Whinging when you were 2 years old. Her role was to monitor your general well-being and alert me to anything, significant. By significant you mean signs of the inheritance manifesting, Harry said. Yes. So you intended to bind me again. The pause this time was the longest yet. Dumbledore's eyes went to the empty phoenix perch and stayed there for a moment before returning to Harry. I told myself I would reassess, he said. That was not the same as no. I think, he stopped. Tried again. I think I had a plan for you, Harry, that was built on love and genuine fear and a very specific vision of what needed to happen in the world. And those things together made me certain enough of my own judgment that I stopped questioning it. That is the most honest thing I can tell you about why I did what I did. Harry looked at him. The prophecy, he said. Dumbledore didn't blink. Didn't flinch. But something settled in him, a kind of resignation. You know about it. I know there is one. I know it involves me and Voldemort. I know you've had it for 10 years and haven't told me. Harry's voice was entirely even. I'd like to hear it now. Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke the prophecy in full, in a flat voice that gave it no drama, just words, just syllables, the thing itself. Harry listened without interrupting. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies, and the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal, but he will have power the Dark Lord knows not, and either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives. The office was very quiet. He knows not, Harry repeated. The power he knows not. He looked at Dumbledore. You thought the power was love. The protection from my mother. I believe that was part of it, Dumbledore said carefully. But you've seen what I am, Harry said. And you think it's the fire. I think, Dumbledore said, that the prophecy, like all prophecies, means more than one thing simultaneously. And yes. I think your inheritance is central to it. He folded his hands again. Which is why the binding was, in my mind, about control of timing. Voldemort is not gone. He is diminished. He will return, eventually, in some form. I wanted you to be ready when that happened. On your schedule, Harry said. On a schedule I believed would work, Dumbledore said. The difference was small and he knew Harry heard it. Harry stood up. He walked to the window and looked out at the grounds in the early morning light, the lawn still blue with dawn, the lake flat and still, the edge of the forbidden forest dark against the lightning sky. He stood there for a moment, not because he needed to think but because he wanted the physical reality of it, the actual scale of the place, the fact that he was here and standing on his own terms. He turned back. I'm not going to be what you planned, he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact, delivered as such. I understand why you planned it. I think you genuinely believed it was right. But I'm not going to operate inside the framework you built for me, and I'm not going to let Voldemort, however he comes back and in whatever form, become my defining problem. He's a problem I'll deal with when it arrives. He is not the center of my story. Dumbledore looked at him for a long, searching moment. No, he said, quietly. I don't suppose he is. What I will do, Harry said, is keep you informed of what I find out and what I plan to do about it. Not ask permission. Inform. He held Dumbledore's gaze. And I'll expect the same. Full information, when you have it. No managing the timing. No deciding what I'm ready for. That is a significant ask, Dumbledore said. It's a reasonable one, Harry said. From a person to another person. The portraits on the walls were, all of them, awake now. The room was very still. Dumbledore looked at Harry with those old, weighted eyes for what felt like a full minute, and Harry didn't move or look away or qualify anything he'd said. All right, Dumbledore said. Agreed. Harry nodded once. Good morning, Professor, he said, and went down to breakfast. Potions was on Thursday. The dungeon classroom was cold the way dungeons were cold, stone and preserved chill that the heating charms didn't quite reach, and it smelled of something sharp and green beneath the accumulated centuries of spilled brews. Harry arrived 3 minutes early, took a seat near the middle, not front, not back, the spot that gave optimal sight lines in all directions, and set out his things neatly. Hermione was already there, on his left, with her ingredients kit open and organized. Neville came in looking like someone walking towards something they'd been dreading, and Harry gestured at the seat on his right. Snape entered without announcement. He simply appeared at the front of the room, black robes moving with a quality that Harry thought was either theatrical skill or genuine force of personality, and was probably both. He looked at the class with the expression of someone who had seen too many first-year classes and had made a permanent adjustment to their expectations. "There will be no foolish wand-waving in this class," he said, and his voice was exactly what his published paper's footnotes had sounded like, precise and slightly contemptuous, interested in the subject and not particularly interested in the audience. "Many of you come here expecting I will be more lenient than your other professors because there are no incantations to botch. You will discover this is incorrect." His dark eyes moved across the room. "Potions requires the kind of attention and patience that most people your age treat as optional. It is not optional here." His gaze reached Harry and stopped. Harry met it without any particular expression. There was a quality to Snape's attention that was different from most people's, more layered, more analyzing. Where Dumbledore watched with warmth and calculation in equal measure, Snape watched with pure analysis, like a man who'd learned not to trust surface presentation and had built the habit of looking through it to something else. What he was looking for, Harry couldn't quite tell yet. "Potter," Snape said. "What would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" Standard opener. Harry had read about it, the question Snape asked most first years, partly to establish authority and partly because the answer had some genuine depth to it, in the right hands. Depending on preparation, either the draft of living death or a precursor to it, Harry said. Though the interaction is more interesting than that, because asphodel in a wormwood base produces a suppression effect on the central nervous system that could theoretically be used for something significantly more specific than a sleeping draught if the concentration ratios were adjusted. Your 1981 paper implies as much, though you don't state it directly. The room had the quality of a held breath. Snape stared at him for approximately 3 seconds with an expression that moved very fast through several stations, surprise, sharp interest, something that might have been offense at having his published work cited by a first year, and settled on a kind of aggressive neutrality. "My paper," he said. "In Potions Quarterly," Harry confirmed. "Your framework for modified wolfsbane has an implied broader application. I wasn't sure if that was deliberate or incidental. Where did you obtain a copy of that paper?" Snape said, and his voice had an edge to it now, not anger exactly, more like something primed. "A bookseller I use," Harry said. "I can give you the contact details if you like." Another short silence. Snape turned away abruptly, which Harry read as someone who needed a moment and was too experienced to show it. "Your question will be addressed later," he said, to the room. "Today you will brew a simple calming draught. The instructions are on the board. Begin." He moved to the front of the classroom. But Harry caught, in the 3 seconds before Snape fully turned away, the specific expression on his face, not the irritation he'd put on for the room but the thing underneath it, the look of a person who just encountered something they hadn't expected and were deciding what to do with it. Harry, for his part, felt the same. Snape was considerably more interesting than expected. Neville, beside him, exhaled very slowly. "How did you know about his paper?" he whispered. "Read it 2 weeks ago," Harry said. "Your powdered root is too fine. Grind it to a coarser texture or the infusion will be too rapid." Neville looked at his ingredients. Looked at Harry. Adjusted his technique. The week built in layers. Transfiguration with McGonagall, who walked into class and turned her desk into a pig and back and said, "Transfiguration is some of the most complex and dangerous magic you will learn. Anyone who messes around in my class will leave and not come back." She caught Harry's eye briefly and something passed between them that wasn't quite a smile but was in the vicinity. She taught with the exacting precision of someone who loved the subject rather than the performance of it, and Harry liked her for it. Charms with Flitwick, who was small and enthusiastic and technically brilliant in a way that his teaching style sometimes obscured. Harry spent most of the first charms class doing wand work at 60% capacity, calibrating to the room. It wasn't strategic concealment exactly, more that he was learning the feel of spellwork through a wand, having done most of his casting wandlessly for years. The wand, 11 inches, holly, phoenix feather, which he discussed with Ollivander in an interaction that had deserved its own exercise book, added a specificity to his casting that was interesting, a narrowing of the channel that the wandless work didn't have. He'd asked Ollivander, in the shop, whose feather was in the core. The old wand-maker had looked at him with pale, protuberant eyes for a long moment. The same phoenix, Ollivander had said, whose feather sits in the wand of Tom Riddle. It's given one feather before yours. 2 wands. The phoenix did not often give feathers. He'd paused. It declined, for a long time. And then you walked in. Harry had thought about that on the train, and again in the boat, and again in bed on the first night. A phoenix that had declined to give feathers for decades and then given one for him. He'd filed it with the questions about Fawkes's empty perch, the pull toward it, the sense of something familiar and unmet. He'd find out in time. History of Magic was Binns, which explained why every written account Harry had encountered described it as soporific. The ghost professor delivered his material with the absolute certainty of someone who had mistaken the accumulation of dates and names for the telling of a story. Harry spent the class making his own notes from his own understanding and occasionally adding the actual interesting context that Binns left out, which made the material significantly less dull. Ron Weasley, sitting behind him, spent the class sleeping, which Harry respected as an adaptation strategy. Defense against the dark arts, Quirrell. He was stuttering, nervous, permanently wrapped in a turban that smelled of garlic, and the class watched him the way students watch a teacher who seems afraid of their own subject. He was, Harry thought from the first lesson, a man in significant distress. And from the first lesson, Harry could feel it, something wrong about him. Not the magical traces of enchantments or wards, but something deeper, a kind of layered wrongness like 2 signatures overlaid, like 2 people occupying the same shape. He didn't say anything. He watched. After Tuesday's defense class, he walked with Hermione to the library and said, quietly, something's wrong with Quirrell. Hermione was quiet for a moment, which meant she'd noticed something too. He shook, she said. When he mentioned dark artifacts. But his hands went still again immediately, like someone was controlling them. 2 people in one space, Harry said. Or something like it. Hermione's eyes sharpened. You can feel that? I can feel the magical signature, Harry said. It's double. Like an echo that doesn't quite line up with the source. He pulled a book off the shelf, Magical Possession, not on any curriculum list, but available in the general collection. Don't make it obvious you're watching him. Just, watch. Is it dangerous? Hermione asked. Direct, practical. Almost certainly, Harry said. I don't know in what direction yet. He opened the book. But I will. Friday afternoon, and the week had a particular end-of-week quality, the accumulated weight of new information and new spaces and new people sitting on the first years like a physical thing. Harry was not tired exactly, the Phoenix constitution didn't do fatigue in the same way, he'd long since accepted this, he simply ran, but he could feel the tiredness of the people around him, Neville's quiet relief that he'd survived the week, Ron's sudden detailed opinions about every teacher they'd encountered. They were in the Gryffindor common room, the 3 of them and Hermione, and Ron was providing an exhaustive breakdown of each professor while eating approximately his own weight in crisps, and it was comfortable and funny and easy in the specific way that Harry had not often had in his life, this simple domesticity of people who were becoming something like home. Malfoy arrived at the portrait hole at the end of a Gryffindor prefect-escorted visit to return a book, which was technically the reason he was there and practically an excuse for reconnaissance, and he leaned through the portrait hole, not coming in, just being present, and said, "Potter. Word is you told Snape about his own paper." "Word still travels," Harry said. Malfoy's expression had the quality it had had on the train, that layered thing, the social performance, and underneath it something more genuine, which was interest and a need to have it confirmed that this person was actually as interesting as preliminary data suggested. "He hasn't called a student impressive in 5 years, Malfoy said. "He called you technically irritating." "For Snape, that's nearly the same thing." "Good to know," Harry said. Malfoy looked at him for a moment longer. "The Slytherins think you're going to be a problem," he said. "For who?" Harry asked. A pause. "Good question," Malfoy said, and left. Ron stared at the portrait hole. Was Malfoy just being almost reasonable? "He's smart," Harry said. "He just hasn't had many situations that required him to use it." "His father is in with Voldemort," Ron said flatly, and then seemed slightly surprised at himself for saying it aloud. "I know," Harry said. "That doesn't automatically make Draco anything. It gives him a context that he has to decide what to do with." He looked at Ron. "What do you decide to do with your context?" Ron thought about this with the focused expression of someone who didn't like being asked to think philosophically and was doing it anyway because the question was fair. "Try to be better than the worst version of where you came from, I suppose," he said. "Exactly," Harry said. Saturday brought 2 things, a letter from Ragnarok, brief and precise, noting that a request had been made by Albus Dumbledore's office to access certain records pertaining to the Potter estate holdings, and that Gringotts had declined on the basis of the account of standing arrangement, and a notice on the Gryffindor board that first-year flying lessons would take place Wednesday. The letter he sent back to Ragnarok said simply, "Thank you. Please continue to decline all such requests. H.P." The flying notice he read with the uncomplicated pleasure of someone who had been told they would be doing something they were going to enjoy. Neville looked at the notice with different feelings entirely. "I fell off my Uncle Algy's motorbike when I was 8, he said. "It's not the same thing obviously. But broomstick flight is completely different from a motorbike," Harry said. "The broom responds to intention, not mechanical input. Your magic guides it naturally. The physical intuition is actually easier, not harder, for people whose accidental magic is well documented." Neville frowned. "I haven't told you much about my accidental magic." "You told me Trevor nearly got dropped at the barrier," Harry said. "And that your charms spells have been inconsistent. The pattern, magic that fires strongly in emotionally charged moments and is harder to replicate calmly, that's very specific. It means your magical generation is there, it's just emotionally gated. Flying is going to unlock something for you because it's physical and immediate and doesn't give you time to second guess." Neville absorbed this the way he absorbed everything Harry said, carefully, with a slight furrow between his brows that meant he was testing it against his own experience. "Either that or I fall off," he said. "You won't fall off," Harry said. "I'll be right there." Wednesday came, and the flying lesson was on the lawn south of the castle in cold October air, Madame Hooch with her yellow hawk eyes and her no-nonsense brevity. 11 first-year Gryffindors and 11 first-year Slytherins lined up with school brooms that had seen better decades. Harry put his hand over his broom and said, "Up," and it came up before the word was entirely finished, which was, he noted, slightly faster than everyone else's. Hermione's came up with a sharp efficiency that suggested she'd rehearsed. Neville's shot upward with sudden violence and hit him on the chin, which made him reel, and several people started laughing. Harry watched Neville, who was touching his chin and looking at the broom with the expression of someone recalibrating, and said, quietly, "Your magic is strong." The broom read that clearly. "Just let it feel you, don't push." Neville set his hand over the broom again and the broom came up straight and steady. Madame Hooch gave the mounting instructions. They mounted. Kicked off. The instruction to stay low lasted approximately 40 seconds before Madame Hooch spotted Neville rising sharply and ran toward him, and Neville, surprised by her shout, overcorrected and shot upward. Everyone watched Neville rise, and the rising had the horrible momentum of an accident in progress. Harry was off the ground before Neville crested 15 feet, not with any visible urgency but with the efficiency of someone acting on a decision already made. He drew level with Neville at about 20 feet, Neville pale, grip white on the broom beginning to wobble as the gust caught it, and said, "Neville. Look at me." Neville looked at him. His broom steadied incrementally. "You're fine," Harry said. "You're going to ease off the forward grip and shift your weight back slightly, and the broom will slow and descend. Your magic already knows what to do." "I'm very high," Neville said. "You're about 25 feet, Harry said. "That's not actually very high. It just feels that way because it's your first time." He kept his voice even, unhurried. "Back weight. Easy grip. There you go." Neville's broom descended in a slow, clean arc. It wasn't elegant, nothing about Neville's first flying lesson was elegant, but it was controlled, and when he landed he stood on the grass and looked at his own hands as if they'd done something without his permission that had turned out to work. "Right," Madame Hooch said, from the ground, with an expression that was reassessing several things. She looked at Harry. "You've flown before." "A bit," Harry said. "How much is a bit?" "Enough," Harry said pleasantly. She gave him a look that was simultaneously suspicious and pleased and ultimately resigned. "Fine. 5 points to Gryffindor for preventing what would have been a lengthy paperwork situation." Across the lawn, among the Slytherins, Malfoy was watching the whole scene with an expression that had moved from anticipatory amusement. He'd clearly expected Neville to fall and Neville to be the story, to something else. He was looking at Harry with that recalibrating expression again. The one that meant, "This is not what I modeled." Neville, beside Harry, looked up at him from under his fringe. "You said you'd be right there," he said. "I said I would," Harry said. Neville was quiet for a moment. Then, with the particular gruffness of someone who didn't say things easily, "Nobody's really done that before." "Just, been right there." Harry didn't say anything. He just looked at Neville, and Neville nodded once, and they walked back to where Hermione and Ron were waiting, and Ron said immediately, 25 feet. "Neville, that was brilliant actually, most people would have," and the moment closed naturally, covered by the warmth of Ron's particular gift for making people feel accidentally heroic. Harry looked back once at the castle. The windows caught the October sun and threw it back amber and bright, and somewhere in the deep complex magic of the building something warm turned toward him again, that sense of acknowledgement, of recognition. He turned back to his friends and walked inside. Snape stopped him after potions on Thursday. "A word," he said, not looking up from the grating on his desk, which was the kind of passive control move Harry had catalogued and understood and was unbothered by. He waited while the rest of the class filed out, Hermione shooting him a glance that he returned with a slight nod, and then the room was empty and Snape looked up. "Where did you actually get the paper?" Snape said. "Margot's rare texts in Nocturne Alley," Harry said. "She has 3 copies. Academic surplus. You can have one if you want, I already have annotated notes." Snape's expression made several extremely controlled movements. "I'm not asking because I want the contact details," he said, with the precision of someone speaking very carefully. "I'm asking because that paper was published in a journal with a circulation of approximately 40 specialists and I want to understand how an 11-year-old with a non-magical upbringing obtained a copy and read it before starting school." "I don't have a non-magical upbringing," Harry said. "I've been living in the magical world, mostly, for about 4 years. And reading whatever I could find." A pause. Snape was looking at him with that analytical assessment again, sorting through the information, building something from it. "Your grades for this week's practical were the top of the year," he said. "Marginally ahead of Granger. Your theoretical framework, based on the questions you've asked, is at approximately 3rd-year level. 4th in some areas," Harry said. Snape's jaw moved. 4th year. The channeling theory in your Wolfsbane paper implies a broader methodology for potion magic interaction that I've been working through. I have questions about it if you're interested. Harry paused. I won't take up class time with them. But if there are office hours. Snape looked at him for a long, suspended moment. Tuesday evenings, he said. 7 o'clock. If you're going to waste my time with elementary questions, you'll leave immediately and the arrangement will end. Understood, Harry said. And Potter. Harry was at the door. Snape's voice had not changed in register, but something in it had shifted, from the default contempt to something more like statement of fact. I taught your mother in her later years. She was the most gifted potion student I encountered until today. He paused. I don't say that easily. Harry looked back at him. I know, he said. She mentioned you. Snape went very still. Where, he said. A letter she left me, Harry said. She said you were the only person in her year who actually understood what potions could do rather than what they were supposed to do. He held Snape's gaze for a moment. She was right. The paper shows it. He nodded once. Tuesday at 7. He walked out. In the dungeon corridor, cool and stone quiet, he paused for a moment with his hand against the wall, feeling the deep old magic of the castle around him, and thought about his mother mentioning Snape's name in her annotated edition of Advanced Potion Making, not the letter, but the textbook he'd found in the vault, every margin full of her handwriting, including one notation beside a complex interaction formula. SP would extend this, ask him sometime. The SP had been circled. He'd known, reading it, that SP was someone she respected. Now he knew who. He pushed off the wall and walked toward the stairs and the daylight. Above him, in the great hall, in the library, in the grounds and towers and corridors, Hogwarts moved through its day with 1,000 students and their 1,000 ordinary problems, and Harry Potter was first among them, not by title, not by prophecy, but by the simple fact of being the most present person in any room he walked into, warm and certain and very much, entirely, himself. Which was, as it turned out, more than enough to change everything. Chapter 5, What the Fire Remembers. The restricted section didn't stay restricted long. Harry had the library mapped by the end of his second week, not just the geography of it, the shelves and study tables and the particular window alcove where the afternoon light hit at an angle good for reading, but the magical geography. Which sections had monitoring charms on them? Where the charms were anchored. What they were designed to detect. The restricted sections wards were old and moderately sophisticated, designed to catch standard underage magical signatures attempting unauthorized access. They were keyed to detection through wand-based magical contact, the expected method of a student reaching for a book. They were not designed for someone who could read the shape of a room's enchantments from the doorway without touching anything, identify the precise gap in the detection field between the third and fourth shelves from the left, and step through it while leaving no magical footprint. He went on a Sunday evening in November, after curfew, wearing the invisibility cloak he'd found folded in a box at the bottom of the Potter vault, wrapped in a note from his father that said, James Potter, 1977, use wisely, lose this and I will find a way to haunt you. And he moved through the library with the careful quiet of someone who respected spaces even when he was doing something the spaces didn't officially permit. He wasn't there for danger or rule-breaking for its own sake. He had a specific list. The list had come from 3 weeks of triangulating references, the genealogy texts he'd read in London, the historical fragments Arabella had collected, the Gringotts documents, and the gap in his mother's letter where she'd written something very old in James's line without specifying sources. Every text he could find in the general library either referenced the original Phoenix families in one line and then moved on, or cited the restricted section directly for deeper material. He worked methodically. Third shelf from the left, 2 rows in. A section of books so old they had no printed spines, just handwritten labels that had faded to different degrees depending on what kind of ink had been used and what kind of magic had been involved in the writing. He felt each one before pulling it, not with his hands, with that spatial sense, reading the magical texture of the objects, the accumulated intention baked into old things. Some were nothing. Curriculum adjacent, restricted only because of some outdated classification system that no one had updated in 50 years. Some were genuinely dangerous, the kind of dark that sat in the material itself rather than the content, and those he put back immediately. And 3 books from the right end of the second-to-last shelf, there was one that pulled. Not dramatically. Not the theatrical pull of bad fiction. Just a quiet, steady sense of orientation, the way a compass settles. Here. He pulled it carefully. It was small and very old, older than the school, he thought, feeling the magical date of it, though that assessment was imprecise. The cover was red leather, worn to softness, with no title visible on the front. Inside the cover, in ink that had gone the color of old rust, someone had written, "For those who carry fire and need to remember what it means." He sat down cross-legged on the restricted section floor, wrapped in the invisibility cloak, and read. The book wasn't a history in the conventional sense. It was more like a journal that had accumulated contributors over centuries, different hands, different styles, the occasional date that placed entries anywhere from the 11th century to what he estimated was the late 16th. They wrote in Latin, in Old English, in something that might have been medieval Welsh, and in one section in a language Harry didn't recognize at all, which he suspected was a magical dialect rather than any Muggle language. But threaded through every section, regardless of language, was a continuity of subject, and Harry, who had spent 4 years building his own understanding from fragments, found the shape of it immediately. They were all phoenix-blooded. They were all writing to those who would come after them. And they were all, in their different centuries and different voices, trying to say the same thing. He read until 3 in the morning, sitting on cold stone with the invisibility cloak pooled around him and the castle breathing slowly in the deep dark of night, and what he understood by the time he closed the book and tucked it inside his robes was this: the Phoenix inheritance wasn't a gift or a curse. It was a relationship. The fire didn't belong to the person, it was held in trust between the person and something older, something the writers called by different names across the centuries but described consistently: a presence. An intelligence. Not a person, not a god, not a familiar in the standard sense. Something more foundational than any of those categories. The fire was the contact point between that presence and the human world, and the human who carried it was, in the old word that kept recurring in Latin and Welsh both, a bridge. And every writer, without exception, mentioned the same thing about the bridge. There was always a phoenix. A specific phoenix. Not the person's phoenix, not owned, not commanded. A phoenix that existed in correspondence with the fire carrier, that was the living embodiment of the older presence that the fire connected to. Every writer described finding it differently. One had followed the warmth. One had followed a sound. One had simply walked into a room where the phoenix was and known, with bone-deep certainty, that the relationship had been ongoing without their knowledge since before they were born. And every writer described what happened when they found it: completion. Not power gained. Not some magical transformation. Just, something that had been incomplete, clicking into place. Harry lay the book in his lap and looked at the dark of the restricted section ceiling and thought about an empty perch in a circular office. About a pull he'd felt since he walked into the castle. About a phoenix that had declined to give feathers for decades and then given one for him. He thought about Dumbledore's bird. Fox, the old man called it. Had called it for decades, apparently. He put the book away carefully. Replaced it exactly where he'd found it. Moved back through the detection gap and through the library and into the corridor, and stood in the cold stone dark of the castle at 3 in the morning and let the warm pull in his chest orient him the way a compass orients, pointing not north but inward and upward, toward the tower staircase and the circular office and the occupied perch that he was fairly certain was occupied by something that had never, in any meaningful sense, belonged to Albus Dumbledore. He didn't go. Not tonight. Tonight was for understanding. Action could wait for daylight and a clearer plan. But he smiled, standing there in the dark, and the warmth in his chest ran a little brighter. He told Hermione in the morning. Not everything, the details of the night's reading he kept close, partly because the book was old and personal in a way that was hard to explain and partly because some things needed to be understood before they were shared. But the core of it, the shape of what he'd found, the empty perch and what it might mean. Hermione listened the way she always listened, completely, actively, with that slight forward lean that meant she was building a parallel framework from what he said and checking it against what she knew. They were in the alcove window of the library, the good one with the afternoon light, their books open and ignored. "Fawkes has been with Dumbledore since the 1930s, she said. "That's in Hogwarts, a history, not detailed, but mentioned. If what you're saying is right, then either Fawkes chose Dumbledore, which isn't how it works," Harry said. "Not according to the book. A correspondence phoenix doesn't choose a person like a familiar does. It exists in correspondence with a bloodline. It doesn't pick someone else just because the bloodline isn't available." "Then Dumbledore found Fawkes and they formed a bond," Hermione said slowly, "but that bond was never the primary one," Harry said. Hermione thought about this. Her expression moved through several things. "Dumbledore might not know," she said. "He might genuinely believe Fawkes is his. He's had him for 60 years, that's a real relationship, whatever the underlying mechanics are." "I know," Harry said. "Which is why this is complicated." He looked at his hands on the table, no glow, just hands, but the warmth was always there underneath, always present. "I'm not trying to take something from him. That's not what this is. But if Fawkes and I are in correspondence, that's a fact. It existed before either of us knew about it. What happens with that information is a different question." Hermione studied him. "When are you going to go up there?" "When I know exactly what I'm going to say," Harry said. "You usually know what you're going to say." "This one's different," Harry said, and he meant it. He could feel the difference in his own chest, not uncertainty exactly, but the awareness that this was territory where strategy wasn't the primary tool. This required something older than strategy. Hermione looked at him for a moment longer, then nodded and opened her Transfiguration essay. She trusted his timing. This was one of the things about Hermione that Harry thought was genuinely rare. She had strong opinions about most things and expressed them freely, but she had also learned, over 4 years of genuine friendship, the specific texture of the moments when Harry was working something out and needed the silence more than the input. He sat with the afternoon light coming through the old glass of the window and the warmth in his chest steady as a heartbeat, and he thought. The dreams started that week. Not nightmares. Harry had had nightmares before, low-grade and unspecific, the general static of a difficult childhood occasionally organizing itself into images. These were nothing like those. These were vivid and warm and clear, the way good memories feel different in texture from bad ones even when you're not sure why. In the dreams he was somewhere ancient, somewhere with the quality of the very old forest at the edge of the Hogwarts grounds but not quite that, somewhere older and less defined. And in the dreams there was fire, not his fire, not the gold-orange of his own nature, something larger. Something that surrounded rather than emanated from him, the way a hearth surrounds a room with warmth, the way sunlight is the source rather than the effect. He woke from these dreams not shaken but oriented, the way sleep ought to leave you and rarely does, the particular clarity of a mind that has processed something important. He was starting to understand what it felt like when the older presence was communicating. Not in words. In sense impression, in the way the warmth in his chest would shift its quality slightly, pulse once, slow and deliberate, when he was about to do something that aligned with it, or cool by 1 degree when something was off. He was starting to be able to read it. He wrote in his exercise book, "The fire isn't mine. I'm carrying it. That's a different relationship to it than I thought. And then, beneath that, but carrying it, I can go where it needs to go." Which might be what carrying has always meant. Quirrell deteriorated through November. It was slow and then sudden, the way some things are. In October his double signature had been uncomfortable but stable, 2 presences in one space, one clearly dominant, one suppressed, like a song playing at low volume under a louder song. By mid-November the balance had shifted, the suppressed one louder, and by the last week of November Harry could feel it from across the defense classroom with no particular effort. After the third lesson where Quirrell had visibly trembled through the entire class and the turban had sat wrong, as if the person wearing it had forgotten how to wear it naturally, Harry stayed late while Hermione waited outside. He went to Quirrell's desk and waited until the man looked up. "Are you all right?" Harry asked. Quirrell's eyes were too bright and too mobile, flickering in a way that reminded Harry of something he'd read about legilimency, not being performed on him but as a symptom of someone who was being performed on continually, someone whose mind was under constant external pressure. Perfectly fine, thank you, P. Potter." "You're not," Harry said. "And you know you're not." He kept his voice even, without accusation or drama. "Is there someone you can go to?" "Not Dumbledore, someone you actually trust." Quirrell stared at him. For one moment, the flickering stopped. Something in his expression looked terribly tired and terribly old and very frightened. "It's too late for that," he said, and his voice for that one moment was entirely steady, all the stutter gone, just a man saying a true thing. "It's been too late for some time." Then the flickering started again and the stutter came back and he looked away, and Harry stood there for a moment looking at him before picking up his bag and walking out. He told Hermione, and Hermione said, "What's inside him?" "You know what it is." "I think so," Harry said. "Voldemort," she said. "Not a question. Something of him. A fragment. A piece that survived." Harry walked beside her down the corridor, voice low. "He's been on the back of Quirrell's head, I think, under the turban. Drinking from him, using him. Quirrell agreed to it at some point, there's a consent signature in the magical trace, it didn't happen against his will originally. But I think whatever Quirrell agreed to and what he got are different things." Hermione shuddered, brief and controlled. "What do we do?" "Watch. Map it. Understand what he's after before I move on it." Harry looked at her. "He's after something in the school. Something Dumbledore's already protecting. We need to know what it is and how it works before we interfere. You want to let it play out." "I want to understand the whole game before I make a move," Harry said. "Moving too early on incomplete information is how you win one situation and create 3 worse ones." Hermione was quiet for a moment. "What if someone gets hurt while you're watching?" "Then I move earlier," Harry said immediately. "Watching isn't the same as not being ready." She accepted this because it was true and because she knew him. He went to Dumbledore's office on a Saturday in early December afternoon, the castle quieter with most students at Hogsmeade. First years couldn't go, which Harry found administratively interesting given that he'd been navigating London alone since he was 7, but he understood the principle of population level rules. He knocked on the gargoyle post and said, "I'd like to see the headmaster," and the gargoyle let him through. He climbed the stairs. Knocked on the office door. Heard the quiet, "Come in," and entered. Fawkes was on the perch. The phoenix was the size of a large swan, brilliant crimson and gold, perched with the self-contained composure of something that didn't need the perch but used it as a courtesy to the humans around it. Its eyes were black and very bright and it looked at Harry the moment he walked through the door. Not the way animals look at people, that general interested gaze. The way a person looks at someone they've been expecting. The way you look when someone you've been waiting for finally arrives. Harry stopped inside the doorway for a moment. Just to let himself feel it, the recognition, the warmth doubling in his chest, the sense of the compass settling that he'd felt at 3 in the morning in the restricted section library, now fully realized, now actual. Here. They looked at each other, Harry and the Phoenix, across the 10 feet of Dumbledore's circular office, and the older presence he'd been learning to read was suddenly not background warmth but foreground reality, full and clear and unambiguous. "There you are," he thought. "I wondered when we'd actually meet." Fawkes made a sound, not the full song that phoenixes were supposed to be capable of, just a soft note, 3 syllables descending, like the opening of a phrase that hadn't been spoken for a long time. Harry pressed his hand to his sternum, feeling the warmth there. "Harry." Dumbledore was standing by the window, and his voice was careful in a way it hadn't been before. "I wondered if you'd come today." "I've been working up to it," Harry said honestly. He walked further into the room, not toward Fawkes, not yet, just further in. "You know what I found?" "I know you went to the restricted section," Dumbledore said. "I know what you read." He looked at Harry with an expression that was, Harry thought, more honest than most of his expressions, less layered, more immediate. Something raw underneath the usual warmth. "I have known, for some years, that Fawkes's bond with me was," he stopped. "Not incomplete. Real. A real bond, real affection, real trust." He looked at his phoenix. "But not primary." "When did you know?" Harry asked. "When your parents died," Dumbledore said. Fawkes cried. "They do that, phoenixes weep when something significant is lost." I assumed it was empathic response. But the quality of it was different from anything I'd seen before. It was grief. He paused. Personal grief. The kind you feel for your own people, not the borrowed kind. Harry looked at Fawkes. The phoenix was still watching him with those bright, patient eyes. "And you didn't put it together." "I chose not to examine it too closely," Dumbledore said. He said it without excuse, which Harry respected. "Because examining it would have required a conclusion I wasn't ready to reach." Harry crossed the room and held out his hand, not to Fawkes's leg but open, palm up, between them. An offering, not a demand. Fawkes looked at his hand. Looked at his face. Stepped sideways along the perch until it reached the end and stretched out its neck and placed its beak, very gently, against Harry's palm. The warmth that came was, not an explosion. Not a dramatic surge. It was more like a key turning in a lock, the specific satisfying click of something designed to fit finally fitting. The fire in Harry's chest, which had been his for 4 years, running steady and warm and his, deepened. Not louder. Deeper. Like a river that had been running on the surface suddenly connecting to the aquifer far below, suddenly having access to its own true source. He breathed through it. His hand was glowing, warmly gold, and Fawkes's beak against his palm was warm and real and the bright eyes were looking at him with something that wasn't ownership or possession but recognition. Yes. This is what was missing. This is where the fire was always going. He heard Dumbledore behind him exhale once, slowly. He heard the phoenix begin to sing. It was nothing like he'd been told. The books described phoenix song as glorious, overwhelming, a sound that made other sounds seem thin by comparison. What Harry heard was simpler than that and more complete. It was the sound of something that had been apart coming together. It was the auditory equivalent of the feeling in his chest, not triumph, not drama. Rightness. Just rightness, full and clear. The song lasted perhaps 2 minutes. When it ended the office was very quiet. Harry lowered his hand. Fawkes stepped back slightly but didn't move away. It rearranged itself on the perch with the particular quality of an animal that had been somewhere temporary and has decided it can be somewhere permanent. He turned to look at Dumbledore. The old man was sitting in his chair now, and he looked, Harry thought, genuinely older than usual, not fragile, not diminished, but carrying the weight of something that had just been confirmed rather than merely suspected. He looked at Fawkes with an expression that was complicated with love and grief and something that might have been, strangely, relief. "I should tell you," Dumbledore said, "that I'm not going to pretend this doesn't affect me." "I know," Harry said. He sat in the chair across from the desk. "I'm not here to take anything from you. Whatever you and Fawkes have built over 60 years is real and I'm not asking it to unbe. But the primary correspondence is yours," Dumbledore said. "Always was," Harry said. "That's not my choice. It's just what it is." Dumbledore looked at Fawkes for a long moment. The phoenix looked back at him with the patience of something that existed on a larger timescale than arguments about belonging. Then it turned its head to look at Harry, and then back to Dumbledore, with the distinct air of something that found the whole distinction slightly beside the point. Dumbledore made a sound that was almost a laugh. "Yes, all right," he said, to the bird. "I take your point." Harry relaxed slightly. "There's something else I came to talk to you about." "Quirrell," Dumbledore said. "You know." "I've known since September," Dumbledore said. "I've been watching the situation develop." "Watching it develop," Harry repeated. "The protection on what he's seeking is robust," Dumbledore said. "My expectation was that it would hold." "Your expectation," Harry said, "or your hope?" He looked at Dumbledore steadily. "Because your protection on me held for 6 years and then didn't hold at all. Robust protections fail when the thing pushing against them is sufficiently motivated." A pause. Dumbledore's expression shifted, the layer of professional confidence thinning. "What do you propose?" "I want to see the protection," Harry said. "Whatever it is. I want to understand the shape of it and where the weak points are. Not to fix it, to know it. So that if it fails I can respond in the right place rather than discovering the failure at the wrong moment." "You're asking to go through the traps," Dumbledore said. "I'm asking to map them," Harry said. "Preferably with you." Dumbledore was quiet. The instruments on his shelves hummed and spun, the portraits slept or pretended to, the December wind pressed against the high windows. Fawkes sat on his perch and looked at nothing in particular with the composed patience of something that was not in any hurry at all. "Saturday after next," Dumbledore said. "I'll take you through the protections myself." He paused. "Bring Granger." Harry blinked, slightly. "Why Granger?" "Because she'll see things we both miss," Dumbledore said. "And because she deserves to know what's in this school." His eyes were steady. "We agreed on full information." "We did," Harry said. He stood up. "Saturday after next." He looked at Fawkes one more time. The Phoenix met his gaze with that same patient recognition, that sense of an ongoing conversation paused rather than ended. He felt the warmth of it, steady and deep. "See you tomorrow," he said, to the bird, and he meant it as a statement of fact. Fawkes ducked its head once, deliberate. Harry went to the door. He was halfway out when Dumbledore spoke again. "The song," he said. "I've heard Fawkes sing many times. Over 60 years. I've never heard it sound like that." Harry paused in the doorway. "No," he said. "I don't suppose you have." He went down the spiral staircase with the warmth in his chest running deep and clear, the fire connected to its source, the bridge finally standing between both shores. He found Hermione in the library where he'd left her, sitting with her arithmancy preparation and a cup of tea she'd somehow convinced someone to bring from the kitchens. She looked up when he came in and read his face. She was very good at reading his face, and said, "Well?" "Fawkes," he said. He sat down. "How was it?" Harry thought about how to describe it. The warmth that went deep. The key in the lock. The song that was just rightness. "Like remembering something you didn't know you'd forgotten," he said. Hermione smiled, not the bright performance smile she sometimes wore for teachers, but the smaller real one. "And Dumbledore?" "Managing," Harry said. "Honestly managing, which is better than I expected." He picked up her quill, turned it over in his hands. "He wants you with us on Saturday after next. There's something under the school I need to understand, and he agrees you should know." Hermione put down her arithmancy notes. "What's under the school?" "Something Quirrell, and what's riding Quirrell, wants very badly," Harry said. "And something Dumbledore's been protecting, partly by using this school as bait." He met her eyes. "I think Dumbledore put it here deliberately. To draw Voldemort out." Hermione stared at him. "He put something dangerous in a school full of children as bait." "Greater good," Harry said, with no particular inflection. The expression on Hermione's face went through several clear phases. "Yes," Harry said. "We're going on Saturday," she said. We are, he said. She picked her quill back up, wrote something in her notes, stopped. Harry, she said. How are you? Not the strategy, not the plan. You. He looked at her, slightly surprised, not by the question, Hermione asked it regularly, but by the timing, the particular perception of it. She'd heard something in his voice, or not heard something, the specific frequency of him that she'd learned to read over 4 years. Different, he said, honestly. Something that was incomplete is complete now. It doesn't feel dramatic, it just feels, he searched. Solid. Like footing. I wasn't quite sure if that's turned out to hold. She nodded. Held his gaze. Good, she said, simply. Good. Outside, the December dark was settling over Hogwarts, and the grounds and the lake were going blue-black and still, and somewhere in the castle of Phoenix was settled on its perch with the patient composure of something finally in correspondence with everything it was supposed to be in correspondence with. And Harry Potter, 11 years old, fire carrier and bridge and heir of something very old and very real, sat in the warmth of the library with his oldest friend and felt, for perhaps the first time, that the ground under him was as solid as the fire in him was true. Chapter 6, The Game Beneath the Game. The trapdoor was in the third-floor corridor, behind a locked door that Dumbledore opened with a tap of his wand and the particular ease of someone who'd never had to think about what it would mean to a child to walk through it. Saturday had arrived grey and cold, a proper December morning with frost on the grounds and the lake's surface marbled with it. Harry and Hermione had told Ron and Neville they were doing extra research with Dumbledore, not a lie, exactly, though Hermione had given Harry a look that said she was filing the omission and they would discuss it, and had followed the headmaster through corridors that were empty in the early morning, their footsteps the only sound. Dumbledore moved ahead of them with his robes barely touching the floor, and Harry walked beside Hermione, and he was doing what he always did in unfamiliar spaces, reading the magical texture of the walls, the layers of protection and intention, building a model of the architecture in his head that was as much about what had been done here as what had been built. The third-floor corridor felt different from the rest of the castle. Heavier. Concentrated. Before we go down, Harry said, stopping at the door, I want to know what it is we're protecting. Dumbledore paused with his hand on the door. He looked at Harry and then at Hermione, who was watching him with the expression of someone prepared to hold the space until she got a real answer. The Philosopher's Stone, Dumbledore said. Created by Nicholas Flamel. It produces the elixir of life, unlimited life extension, and can transform any metal to gold. I moved it from Gringotts in August when I became aware that someone had attempted to breach its vault. Hermione made a small, precise sound that wasn't quite a word but had the quality of a word that had been rapidly promoted to a more sophisticated thought. You moved it here, she said. To a school. With protections, Dumbledore said. With protections that a defense professor possessed by Voldemort has been methodically studying since September, Harry said. He kept his voice even. How many of the protections has he worked out? At least 3, Dumbledore said, and something in his voice had the quality of an admission being made to someone whose judgment he'd decided to trust, the particular tone of a man stepping down from a position. The troll was Quirrell's addition. He let it in himself and then raised the alarm, which misdirected attention and allowed him time with the door. The obstacle course beyond the trapdoor was designed collaboratively by the heads of house and myself. Each protection reflects the designer's expertise. Show us, Harry said. The trapdoor opened. They went down. The first chamber held the Cerberus. It was enormous, genuinely enormous, 3 heads and the specific muscular reality of something that could kill you in multiple simultaneous ways, and it was asleep, which was a mercy, and it was sleeping on a trapdoor in the floor. Hermione stood very still beside Harry and looked at it with the controlled expression of someone who was going to have feelings about this later and was currently categorizing the practical information. Music, she said quietly. It sleeps to music. There's a harp, there, in the corner, someone's already used it recently. Harry was looking at the magical trace on the harp. Quirrell, he said. Within the last week. He crouched beside the dog, the Cerberus, 3 separate magical signatures, old and bound and settled into this sleep, and looked at the trapdoor it guarded. Felt the mechanism of it. A simple latch, reinforced with a locking charm, already known. He looked at Dumbledore. He knows this chamber. Yes, Dumbledore said. They went through the trapdoor into the Devil's Snare, Sprout's contribution, and Hermione walked through it with a wandless light charm before it had fully registered her presence, the plant recoiling from the fire quality of Harry's warmth before it had the chance to grip. Then a room of flying keys and a locked door, and Harry stood in the center of it and felt the lock from across the room, the specific key, third from the right on the upper arc of the flight path, damaged wing, and plucked it from the air without a broomstick, which made even Dumbledore watch with quiet interest. Then the life-size chessboard, which was McGonagall's, and it was beautiful, genuinely, the kind of strategic beauty that made Harry want to stop and study it, which he did for approximately 90 seconds before he understood the solution, the specific forced win sequence. 14 moves, he said. Opening with the knight's sacrifice, forcing the king out in move 8, the rest is forced mate. Hermione had been working it out too. I had 15, she said. Your line is better. Knight's sacrifice at the start, Harry said. It feels counterintuitive but it opens the whole board. He glanced at her. File it, I want to be able to move through this in under 4 minutes if I have to. Then the troll, already incapacitated, which told Harry that Quirrell had been here even more recently than a week, and a potion puzzle that made Hermione's eyes light up in the specific way they lit when something was well designed. Snape, she said, looking at the bottles. Logic puzzle. Most wizards don't bother with logic. She read the note, scanned the bottles, pointed without hesitation. That one to go forward. That one to go back. Are you certain? Dumbledore asked. Completely, Hermione said, and she sounded it. Harry looked at Snape's puzzle and felt something warm in his chest that had nothing to do with the fire. Snape had put a logic problem in a sequence of magical ones, specifically because it would stop most wizards cold. It was a declaration of belief in a particular kind of intelligence. He was going to have to tell Snape he'd found it, and he was going to have to see what expression that produced, and it was going to be worth it. The last chamber was the Mirror of Eriste. It stood against the far wall, tall as a ceiling, framed in ornate gold with an inscription across the top, Eriste stra eru oit ube kafru oit onwosi. Harry looked at the inscription and reversed it automatically, I show not your face but your heart's desire, and then looked at the mirror and did something that took, actually, a small amount of effort. He didn't look at his own reflection first. He looked at the magical structure of the mirror. Read its enchantment the way he read buildings and spaces, feeling the layered intention in it, the centuries of it. There was a concealment mechanism built in, something hidden inside the mirror itself, not visible, accessible only to someone who wanted to find the stone for its own sake rather than for use. He felt the shape of it. Understood the logic. The stone is inside the mirror, he said. Accessible only to someone who finds it but doesn't want to use it. Correct, Dumbledore said. Quirrell hasn't worked it out yet, Harry said. It wasn't a question. As of 2 days ago, Dumbledore confirmed, no. Harry looked at the mirror properly now. His reflection looked back at him. It was just him, not a vision of his parents living, not Voldemort defeated, not Hermione beside him or Hogwarts or any grand desire. Just Harry, standing in the chamber, and the reflection was slightly brighter than it should be, slightly more luminous. The fire visible even in his reflected image, running warm in the glass. His heart's desire, apparently, was simply to be what he was. Fully. Without containment. He said. Hermione looked into the mirror and her expression went private for a moment. He didn't ask and she didn't volunteer, and that was right, and then she stepped back. Dumbledore looked into the mirror last, and whatever he saw, he kept it entirely to himself. But Harry noticed his jaw tighten and then release, and the exhale that followed was slow and deliberate, the breathing of a man managing something. He'll move soon, Harry said, to the room, to Dumbledore, to the problem at hand. Before Christmas, I think. The school empties and the protection thins. The enchantments remain fully active regardless of student population, Dumbledore said. The enchantments, yes, Harry said. But you're the primary active protection, and you'll be gone for Christmas because something will call you away. He looked at Dumbledore directly. Something that will be arranged to call you away. A letter, probably. From someone you trust, with something that sounds urgent. He's smart. Whatever piece of Voldemort is on the back of Quirrell's head retained enough strategic intelligence to construct a misdirection. Dumbledore was very still. You're telling me not to go. I'm telling you what I think will happen, Harry said. What you do with it is your choice. But if you leave, I'll be here. Harry. Dumbledore's voice had a quality in it that was new, not authority, not warmth, something plainer than both. Almost parental, the kind that's earned rather than claimed. This is a piece of Voldemort. Even diminished, I know what it is, Harry said. I've been feeling its double signature in the defense classroom since September. He held Dumbledore's gaze. I won't move carelessly. I won't move alone. He glanced at Hermione, who nodded once with the expression of someone who had absolutely already decided they were doing this. But I'll move when it's needed. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment, standing in the chamber of the Mirror of Erised with the deep underground cold of the castle around them and the fire in Harry's eyes reflected faintly in the gold frame of the mirror's edge. Stay safe, Dumbledore said, which was not agreement and was not refusal and was, Harry thought, the most honest thing the old man could say. Always, Harry said. Let's go back up. Christmas arrived and the school emptied. Harry stayed. So did Ron and Neville, and so did Hermione, whose parents had a prior trip that she'd elected not to join, which Harry suspected she'd arranged specifically to be present and had probably told her parents some version of the truth about because Richard and Helen Granger were not people you successfully half-informed about things that might be dangerous. The castle was beautiful in its quietness. The corridors that were crowded and alive during term had a different quality now, spaces you could hear properly, places you could feel in full rather than in fragments. Harry walked them in the mornings before anyone else was up, feeling the school's old magic at its least diluted, the specific texture of a building that was thinking without being distracted. He spent Christmas morning with Ron and Neville in the common room, and Ron gave him a hand-knitted maroon jumper from Molly Weasley that had a golden H on it and smelled of the Weasley house, something warm and slightly chaotic and full of people, and Neville gave him a small potted plant from the greenhouses, a fire-leaved amaranth that Neville had grown himself and that leaned visibly toward Harry's warmth when he held it. Hermione gave him an annotated copy of Advanced Theories of Magical Resonance and a note inside it that said for the chapters on source magic, you'll want pages 47 to 89 first. He gave Ron a magical chess analysis guide he'd had commissioned through a specialist bookseller, which made Ron go very quiet for several minutes in a way that was the Weasley equivalent of profound emotion. He gave Neville a book on advanced herbology that cross-referenced plant properties with specific magical applications, with a handwritten index in the front keyed to Neville's known interests. He gave Hermione a first edition of a magical theory text she'd been chasing for a year that he tracked down through the Gringotts network, and she held it for a moment with both hands and said nothing, which meant everything. He sent Arabella a letter and a small gift. He sent Ragnarok a formal Gringotts-appropriate seasonal message that he'd drafted carefully, respectful of the goblin protocols he'd learned over 4 years. He sent nothing to Dumbledore, and Dumbledore sent nothing to him, and they were both right about that. The letter calling Dumbledore away arrived on December 27, from a ministry contact, tagged urgent on a matter of national security. Harry knew when it arrived because Fawkes flew to him, not to Dumbledore's office but to wherever Harry was in the castle, which on that occasion was the library, and landed on the table beside his book and made that particular 3-note sound that Harry had learned to read as urgency not panic, attention needed, move thoughtfully. Harry put his book down. Stroked the Phoenix's head once, briefly. He's leaving, he said. Fawkes blinked. Right, Harry said. He sent his Patronus, Silver, something between a stag and a bird, not quite either, which Dumbledore had looked at with complicated eyes the one time he'd seen it, to Hermione, with the message, "Tonight probably. Common room. Bring your notes." Hermione arrived in the common room at 7 with her notes, and Ron arrived at 7:15, having been told simply that something was happening, and responded with the specific equanimity of someone who had grown up with Fred and George Weasley and had a high threshold for alarming situations. Neville came last, carrying Trevor, and sat in the chair nearest the fire and didn't say anything, just waited, which Harry appreciated. Harry told them everything. The stone, the protections, Quirrell, what was riding Quirrell, what it wanted, what would happen if it got there. Ron went through the sequence of a person whose worldview is being rapidly updated and came out the other side holding his chess guide with white knuckles. "Voldemort," he said. "Actually Voldemort. A piece of him," Harry said. "The original is, diminished. Disembodied. This fragment is in Quirrell, using him. If it gets the stone it can use the elixir to regenerate a physical form." He looked around the group. "I don't intend to let that happen." "What's the plan?" Neville asked. Harry looked at him. Neville, who had come to this conversation without flinching, who was sitting with his toad in his lap and his round face serious and his eyes clear. There was no performance in Neville's courage. It was just there, quiet and reliable, the kind that doesn't need an audience. "I go down," Harry said. "I know the protections. I know the layout. I know what he wants and where it is, and the fact that the mirror won't give it to him because Voldemort," he paused, working it out as he said it, the logic of it clicking, "can only ever want the stone for use. He can't want it without wanting to use it. The mirror's enchantment specifically excludes that. So he'll be stuck." "But Quirrell won't," Hermione said, and her voice was sharp. "Quirrell is still a person. A functional wizard. He can smash the mirror." "He won't," Harry said. "Dumbledore made the mirror the last protection on purpose. He knows that a person who's desperate enough to come all this way won't be thinking clearly. The mirror will stop Quirrell the same way it stops everyone, he'll be looking for himself in it, some version of success, and he'll be trapped." "And then?" Ron asked. "And then I go in and get the stone out of the mirror," Harry said. "Before Quirrell recovers from whatever the mirror shows him." "You can do that?" Neville asked. "I can find things," Harry said. "And the stone's enchantment is built on wanting it without wanting to use it. I don't want to use it." He looked at his hands. "I'm 11. I don't need the elixir of life." A moment of quiet. Then Ron said, "What about Quirrell?" "Voldemort?" Harry was quiet for a moment. "Fire," he said simply. "It happened at 2 in the morning." Harry felt it from his dormitory, the double magical signature moving, the quality of it changed, sharpened, purposeful. He dressed in 2 minutes, picked up the invisibility cloak, went to the common room where Hermione was already awake because she'd set an alarm, and Ron was awake because he'd apparently been unable to sleep, and Neville was awake because Trevor had jumped off the bedside table and woken him. They looked at each other in the firelight. "Stay here," Harry said. "Absolutely not," Hermione said. "The three of you," Harry said. "I need you here. Not for your safety, for mine." He met each of their faces in turn. "If I don't come back in an hour, go to McGonagall. Don't wait, don't reason about it, go immediately." "That's not a request." A silence. Not the silence of people deciding whether to comply, but the silence of people who understand the specific weight of what they're being asked to hold. 1 hour, Ron said. "On the dot." Neville nodded. Hermione crossed the room and put her hand on his arm, brief and firm. "Be careful," she said. "Not cautious. Just, careful." "I know the difference," Harry said. He put on the cloak and went. The corridors were dark and empty, and the castle moved around him the way it always did at night, that slow breathing quality, old stone and centuries of accumulated presence. He walked quickly, feeling Quirrell's double signature somewhere below him, already through the trapdoor. Through Fluffy's chamber, the Cerberus stirring as he entered but not waking, reacting to the fire in him with the instinctive deference animals had for older things. The trapdoor open. He went through. Devil's snare parted for him without being asked, recoiling from his warmth before he'd even moved toward it. The key room, he plucked the right key from the air in 3 seconds. The chessboard, he moved the pieces without touching them, the fire sense working through them, 14 moves in just over 3 minutes, the White Queen sweeping the board and the path opening. The troll still incapacitated. Snape's puzzle, he checked the bottles, confirmed Hermione's solution, drank the small bottle without hesitation and stepped through the black flames. The last chamber. Quirrell was standing in front of the mirror. His turban was removed, which meant the garlic smell was stronger but also meant the back of his head was visible, the face there was something Harry had felt as magical signature but not seen as physical reality, and the seeing was worse than the feeling. It was a face, recognizably human in structure, but preserved in wrongness, the specific horror of something that had refused all of the natural processes that made living things look alive. He stepped out of the cloak and dropped it beside him. Quirrell didn't turn immediately. When he did, the motion was wrong, too smooth, too controlled, the stutter gone. The presence on the back of his head was fully in charge now. "Harry Potter," Quirrell said, and it wasn't Quirrell's voice, not exactly. Something underneath it, using it as an instrument. "I wondered if you'd come. I wondered if you'd finally move," Harry said. He looked at the mirror, at Quirrell's reflection. He couldn't see what the mirror was showing Quirrell, only Quirrell's face, twisted between what it was trying to show him and what he actually was. "It's not giving you what you want." "Not yet," the voice said. Quirrell's body tilted its head. "But you might." Something assessed him from behind Quirrell's eyes, the ancient intelligence of Voldemort, even fragmented, felt different from any other intelligence Harry had encountered. Colder. More absolute. A mind that had spent decades systematically removing everything it deemed weakness until what was left was very powerful and very specific and very, very hungry. "Tell me what you see in the mirror." "Myself," Harry said. "Just myself." "Liar," the voice said, pleasantly. "I can feel the fire in you from here." "Astonishing, really. I knew there was Phoenix blood in the Potter line but I thought Dumbledore had bound it." The voice had the quality of something genuinely interested, a collector assessing an unusual specimen. "I hadn't accounted for the binding failing." "Most people don't account for things they can't imagine," Harry said. Quirrell took a step toward him. Harry didn't move back. The fire in his chest was very present, very awake, running at a level it didn't usually reach during the day, something that recognized what it was facing and responded without drama, not with fear, with attention. "Step away from the mirror," Harry said, "and tell me what's left of Quirrell. Is he still in there?" "Fragments," the voice said, with complete indifference. "Was there a point when he could have gotten out?" A pause. The cold intelligence behind Quirrell's eyes seemed almost amused by the question. "Early on, perhaps. He chose this. He came to me seeking power and I gave him what he wanted." The head tilted the other way. "I always give people what they want. That's how you take everything else." Harry looked at Quirrell's face, the face of a man who was barely there anymore, the remnant of a bad decision made years ago, the specific tragedy of someone who'd reached for something that consumed them. He felt something that was not sympathy but was not nothing either. It was the feeling of looking at a cautionary truth about a choice you'll never make. "Step away from the mirror," Harry said again. "Or what?" The voice was genuinely curious. Harry opened his hands. The fire came differently in the last chamber, fuller, deeper, with the connection to Fawkes and the older presence behind it running clear. It came gold-white, the protective color, not the neutral orange of ordinary days. It came from his hands and his chest and moved through the chamber like light moves through water, finding corners, filling the space with the specific warmth of something that was not angry and was not performing and was entirely serious. Quirrell, the piece of Voldemort in Quirrell, went very still. That, Harry said. What happened next was two things simultaneously. The fragment of Voldemort, recognizing the fire for what it was, Phoenix Source, Ignis Sanguis, something it had perhaps not encountered directly in its centuries of dark knowledge, did what fragmented things do when they encounter something sufficiently whole, it contracted. Pulled back. And in the pulling back, some piece of Quirrell came briefly forward, the exhausted remnant of the man who'd taught defense in a turban all autumn, surfacing for one moment in his own face. Potter, Quirrell said, and it was his voice, the real one, not the smooth instrument of the fragment. It was tired and frightened and something else, something that was close to request. Don't let him. Then he reached for Harry. The fire was not a choice. Not in the way that running or casting a spell is a choice. When Quirrell's hands touched Harry's skin, the fire responded as it responded to anything that came against it, with genuine darkness, cleanly, immediately, without fury. Harry didn't push, didn't direct, didn't aim. He simply let it be what it was. Quirrell's hands on him burned. Not Harry. Harry was unharmed, would always be unharmed by his own fire, but the contact point where darkness met fire was something the fragment couldn't sustain. He heard the fragment scream, felt it tearing away from its host, a horrible separating sensation in the magical signature of the room, and then the shadow thing was loose and present and without its body and facing Harry with nothing between them. It moved toward him. He stood still and let it come, fire running off him the way heat runs from a forge, the chamber bright with it, and when the shadow met the fire it dissolved the way shadows dissolve at noon. Not dramatically. Not with violence. Simply, unmade by the contact with something that was, at its root, the opposite of what it had become. The echo of a scream that was already fading. And then just Harry in the chamber, standing in gold-white fire, with Quirrell's body collapsed on the floor and the mirror behind him and the stone somewhere in it, and the deep underground quiet of a castle around him. He breathed. He crossed to the mirror. Looked at his reflection. His reflection looked back, still just himself, still slightly luminous, and he reached toward his own image with one hand and felt the stone before he touched it, small, dense, warm in a way that was nothing like his own warmth but was related to it, life condensed to a physical point, and it fell out of the mirror into his palm. He stood there holding it. Small red stone. The product of Nicholas Flamel's lifetime of work, the condensed possibility of immortality, sitting in his 11-year-old hand. He thought about what Voldemort had become. What the pursuit of immortality looked like at its extreme end, a fragment, a shadow, preserved beyond all natural endpoint, consuming other people to sustain itself, unable to touch anything living without something giving way. He thought about what his mother's letter had said about owed debts. What you owe the dead. What you owe yourself. He put the stone in his pocket. He checked Quirrell's pulse, present, weak, the breath of someone depleted but not dead. The fragment was gone. What was left was a man who'd made a terrible choice and survived it, barely, which was more than Harry had expected. He went to the entrance of the chamber and sent his Patronus, the silver bird stag, warm and certain, upward through the stone with the message, McGonagall. 3rd floor corridor, last chamber. Quirrell needs medical attention. Stone is recovered. Then he sat down on the cold floor and leaned his back against the cold stone and waited, and the fire settled back to its usual warmth, and the stone was in his pocket, and somewhere above him the castle was breathing in the deep December night. The whole thing had taken 23 minutes. Dumbledore came back at dawn. Harry was in the hospital wing, not in a bed. Madame Pomfrey had checked him over and found nothing to treat and told him he could sit in a chair, when the headmaster walked in with the rapid step of a man who'd received the Patronus message mid-journey and had turned around immediately. His robes were travel-creased. He looked at Harry sitting in the chair beside Quirrell's curtained bed, and the look said several things in sequence without any words. Harry held out the stone. Dumbledore took it. Held it for a moment with both hands, looking at it, and then at Harry, and then at the curtained bed where Quirrell was breathing steadily, weakly, wholly himself again. The fragment is gone, Harry said. Destroyed. Quirrell is, he'll need help. What he agreed to, what he did, that'll need to be dealt with. But the fragment is gone. Are you all right? Dumbledore asked. Fine, Harry said. It was true. He was tired in the specific way of someone who'd done something large and was now coming down from it, but he was physically unharmed, the fire warmth steady and normal. What it felt like, Dumbledore said carefully, when Voldemort's piece came against you, like the fire doing what fire does, Harry said. Meeting something dark and burning it away. He met Dumbledore's eyes. It wasn't a battle. It was just, the nature of things. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Outside, through the high hospital windows, the winter dawn was arriving in strips of pale gold, the first proper light of the day catching the frost on the grounds and turning it briefly brilliant. There are things I need to do, Dumbledore said. With this information. The fragment's destruction, documented properly, it changes what we know about Voldemort's survival, what we know about his nature, what we need to prepare for. He paused. And there are people who need to know what happened here. People beyond this school. The Wizengamot, Harry said. Eventually, Dumbledore said. He was looking at Harry with the expression that Harry had come to identify as the one where Dumbledore was acknowledging something he'd rather have kept within his own control. There will be questions. About how an 11-year-old came to face a fragment of the darkest wizard of the century alone in an underground chamber. About what he was capable of. About what should have been in place to prevent it. About who put a target in a school and called it protection, Harry said. The silence was complete and honest. Yes, Dumbledore said. About that too. Harry looked at him. I'll answer the questions, he said. All of them. Accurately. Dumbledore nodded, once, slowly. Not with defeat. With something that looked, Harry thought, like a man arriving at a reckoning he'd known was coming for a long time and finding, in the arriving, some measure of peace. I know, Dumbledore said. And so will I. Through the hospital wing window, the dawn was fully arrived now, gold and sharp and real, and somewhere in the castle above them a phoenix was singing, faint and clear through the stone, a song that said, this was always how it was going to be. A song that said, well done. A song that said simply, dawn. Harry closed his hand around nothing where the stone had been, and let himself breathe. Chapter 7, Ash to Sovereignty. The news broke on a Wednesday. Not because anyone planned it for Wednesday, but because the Wizengamot session had been scheduled for Tuesday and ran long, and the reporters waiting in the atrium of the ministry had been there since Tuesday morning and were still there Wednesday dawn when Cornelius Fudge walked out with the expression of a man who'd been sitting in a very uncomfortable chair for a very long time and had just been told to remain in it. Harry wasn't at the ministry. He was at Hogwarts, eating breakfast, when the owls came in with the morning editions of the Prophet, and he read the headline from across the table when Ron's copy landed beak first in his eggs. Stone removed from Hogwarts, Dumbledore questioned, the boy who lived faces Voldemort again at age 11, subtle, Ron said, rescuing his eggs. The subheadline is worse, Hermione said. She had her own copy open flat beside her porridge. She read it aloud, questions raised over protections placed in school, Wizengamot to convene special session. She looked up. It started. Harry turned his cup of tea in his hands. Around them the great hall had the specific quality of a room full of people who are all reading the same thing and reacting differently. Gryffindor table was loud and going louder. Slytherin table was very quiet, which meant active processing. Ravenclaw was doing what Ravenclaw always did with significant information, pulling out parchment. Hufflepuff looked alarmed and mutual. At the high table, McGonagall was reading the Prophet with an expression of controlled fury that Harry had never seen on her face before, not the focused annoyance she deployed on students, but something that had actual heat in it, directed at a page that was telling her things she already knew in a way that she clearly found insufficient. Snape wasn't reading it at all. He was drinking coffee and staring at the middle distance with an expression that Harry couldn't fully read from here, though he'd been getting better at reading Snape over the course of the year. Dumbledore was not at breakfast. Harry ate his toast, drank his tea, and let the morning's noise run around him while he thought about the week ahead with the same methodical clarity he'd used to think about everything for 4 years. The Wisengamot session would produce a formal inquiry. The inquiry would require testimony. His testimony would be his own, accurate, unfiltered. Neville sat down across from him, slightly late, with Trevor in his front pocket and the look of someone who'd already absorbed the morning's developments. "My Gran sent a letter," he said. "She says the Wisengamot have been talking about the stone since Sunday. One of her friends on the Auror Oversight Committee told her." He unrolled the letter and slid it across to Harry. "She says she wants to come to the session." Harry read Augusta Longbottom's letter. It was brisk, comprehensive, and contained the phrase "I have been waiting for someone to drag that corridor into the public record for months" in a way that suggested she'd known about the stone for longer than Dumbledore would find comfortable. He handed it back. "Tell her she's welcome to the session. She'll ask you questions," Neville warned. "Good," Harry said. "I like questions I can answer." McGonagall found him between morning classes. He was in the corridor outside the Transfiguration classroom, waiting, and she appeared from the opposite direction and said, "Walk with me, Potter," without slowing her pace, and Harry turned and matched her stride, which required him to move at a fairly aggressive pace for an 11-year-old, though he'd long since stopped finding that observation worth noting. She walked him to a classroom that was empty this period, closed the door, and looked at him with that expression she'd had at breakfast, the one with real heat in it, and Harry waited. "I want to be clear about something," she said, and her voice was precise in the way of someone who is choosing every word rather than just speaking. "I knew there was something on the 3rd floor. Every head of house was asked to contribute a protection. I was not told what we were protecting. I was told it was important and I was told it was temporary." Her jaw was tight. "If I had known what Dumbledore had placed in this building, or what was already in it," she stopped. "You'd have said something," Harry said. "I would have said a great deal," McGonagall said flatly. "Several things loudly and in writing." "I know," Harry said. She looked at him. "You're going to the Wisengamot session?" "Yes." "You'll have legal representation?" "Gringotts is providing an advocate through the account of standing," Harry said. "Not Wisengamot standard representation, the Goblin equivalent, which turns out to have more legal weight in certain contexts because of the treaties. They've been extremely efficient about it." McGonagall looked at him for a moment with an expression that was complicated in a way that resolved into something almost like pride, the reluctant variety. "Is there anything you need from me?" "Your testimony," Harry said. "About what you knew and when. About what the heads of house were told. About what a reasonable level of disclosure would have been and whether it was met." He met her eyes. "Yours will carry weight because you're angry and you're right and it will show." McGonagall was quiet for a moment. Then, "You've been thinking about this for longer than this morning." "Since December," Harry said. "Since I went down with Dumbledore and saw the protections and understood what they were for and what they weren't for." "What do you want from the session?" she asked. It was a genuine question, not rhetorical. She wanted to understand the goal. Harry thought about it honestly. "Accountability in the record," he said. "Not punishment for its own sake. Dumbledore does extraordinary things and some of them have been wrong, and the wrong ones haven't been acknowledged, and an institution that doesn't acknowledge its mistakes propagates them." He paused. "And there's Sirius Black." McGonagall's expression shifted. "He was imprisoned without trial," Harry said. "I have documentation, Gringotts records, a ministry reference in my vault documents. He was put in Azkaban in November 1981 without formal charges ever being tried. He's been there for 10 years. He held her gaze. He's my godfather." McGonagall pressed her lips together. She looked at the classroom wall for a moment, the particular look of someone running through a sequence of events and finding, at every step, something wrong. "I knew Sirius," she said. "I taught him. He was, he was difficult and brilliant and he loved your parents. She turned back to Harry. If there was no trial, there wasn't, Harry said. I've confirmed it 3 different ways. Then that, McGonagall said, slowly and precisely, is not something that can stand. No, Harry said. It can't. The Wisengamot session was the first week of February, after the holidays were fully done and the school year had found its rhythm again, and there was no reasonable administrative justification for delaying it further, which several people had tried to find. Harry travelled to London on a Saturday morning, with Hermione, and met Ragnarok's advocate at the Ministry atrium, a goblin named Grix who was half Ragnarok's age and twice his sharpness and had a briefcase full of documents organized to a standard that made Hermione look at it with the expression of someone who had found something to respect. The Wisengamot chamber was tiered, circular, centuries old, with the particular weight of important decisions made in it over a long time. Harry walked in and sat where Grix directed, in the respondents' area, and looked up at the tiers of assembled witches and wizards and found what he expected, a room full of people who had already made up their minds about different things and were prepared to argue them. He also found Augusta Longbottom in the 3rd tier, wearing a hat with a stuffed vulture on it that somehow enhanced rather than diminished her authority. She met his eye and gave him a short, precise nod. He found Croaker, near the back, not in an official seat. Just watching. He did not find Fudge, who was, apparently, indisposed. His deputy, Amelia Bones, was running the session. She had short grey hair and square glasses and the expression of someone who wanted facts delivered in order and was prepared to insist on it. Dumbledore was in the chamber too, not in the chief warlock's seat, which was notable, which said something about the current state of that particular role. He was seated to one side, in the witnesses section, wearing robes that were plainer than his usual, and when Harry looked at him Dumbledore looked back with the expression Harry had come to associate with him in the post-Stone period, unguarded, present, carrying the weight of things without trying to distribute it onto other people. Harry had talked to him, several times in January. Real conversations, the kind where both people said things they meant rather than things that served them strategically. They were not easy conversations but they were honest ones, and honest was better. Amelia Bones opened the session with a crisp summary of the established facts and then said, "We'll hear from the students first." Harry stood up. He spoke for 40 minutes. Not because he'd planned 40 minutes, he'd planned to be thorough and let the thoroughness take however long it needed. He went chronologically, starting with his discovery of the stone's presence in the castle, the tour of the protections with Dumbledore in December, his assessment of Quirrell's possession, his decision to go into the corridor on December 27th, and what had happened in the last chamber. He was specific. He was precise. He did not editorialize while presenting facts, and he was clear about distinguishing between what he knew directly and what he had inferred, and the inference he labeled as such with the same clarity. The chamber was quiet throughout in the particular way of a room that is paying full attention, the quality that only happens when the information being delivered is genuinely surprising even to people who've been briefed. When he finished the account of events, Amelia Bones asked him one question: "Why did you go alone?" "Because I was the person best equipped to deal with what was down there," Harry said. "That's not arrogance. It's an assessment of available resources. I had capabilities that none of the adults currently in the building had." Dumbledore was absent, and the window for action was short. He paused. "I also want to be clear that I didn't intend to be alone. The situation developed faster than anticipated. My friends were ready to come, and if I'd needed them, they would have come." "But you didn't need them," Bones said. "No," Harry said. "I didn't." He answered questions for another 20 minutes, from various members of the Wisengamot, some of whom were genuinely trying to understand what had happened and some of whom were trying to find a way to make Harry's account less damaging to someone or something they had an interest in protecting. He answered all of them with the same even precision, distinguishing between the kinds of questions as he went, and did not become defensive or heated when the questions were not in good faith. Augusta Longbottom asked him one question from the 3rd tier, in a voice that carried without being raised: "Do you believe the protections placed in this school constituted adequate provision for the safety of its students?" The chamber was very quiet. "No," Harry said. I believe they were designed with competence. I don't believe the decision to place a targeted artifact in a school with 1,200 students, using the students as incidental cover for a trap, meets any reasonable standard of duty of care. The protections were adequate to stop most adult wizards and completely inadequate against any adult wizard with specific motivation and sufficient magical ability, because the entire system depended on the artifact not being known to be there. He looked at Augusta Longbottom steadily. Once someone knew it was there, the protections became a series of puzzles rather than genuine security. And Quirrell knew it was there. Augusta Longbottom nodded once, with satisfaction, and sat back. Dumbledore's questioning came next. Harry listened with his hands folded and his face still, and Dumbledore answered every question without deflection or evasion, and acknowledged, in formal and recorded language, that his decision to place the stone in Hogwarts had been made without adequate consultation, without disclosure to the school's heads of house, and without the full accounting of risk that the situation required. He also said, unprompted, in a moment that made several members of the Wizengamot shift in their seats, I want to address the question of Harry Potter's upbringing and the decisions I made regarding his guardianship. The choice to place him with the Dursley family was mine, made in accordance with what I believed were the requirements of the blood wards that protected him. The binding I placed on his magical core was mine, made without the consent of his parents and in direct contravention of his mother's known wishes. He paused. These decisions were made with genuine belief that they served Harry's safety and the safety of the wider wizarding world. That belief does not make them right, and I want that acknowledged in the public record. The chamber had the quality of a held breath. Harry watched Dumbledore's face as he said it. The man was old and brilliant and had built his entire life on a certainty about what was right and necessary, and saying this, in this chamber, in this formal record, was costing him something real. Harry could see the cost and he didn't look away from it and he didn't feel triumphant about it. He felt something closer to sorrow, actually. The specific sadness of watching someone who could have been uncomplicated ally become complicated cautionary tale. When the formal session closed, Amelia Bones said that the findings would be filed and that specific matters, including the question of Harry Potter's guardianship, the accountability for the stone placement, and several procedural matters regarding Hogwarts oversight, would be addressed in formal rulings within 30 days. She paused before closing. There is one additional matter the chair would like to raise before close, she said. This chamber has received, through Goblin legal channels, a formal petition requesting review of the imprisonment of Sirius Orion Black, incarcerated November 1981, case number. She read a number that Harry had provided to Grix 3 weeks earlier, on the basis that no formal trial was conducted before incarceration. The petition requests that this chamber authorize an immediate review hearing. The sound in the chamber was not loud but it was comprehensive, the specific noise of everyone reacting simultaneously in different directions. The chair is prepared to authorize the review, Bones said, over the noise. Hearing to be scheduled within 14 days. Harry closed his hand on the arm of his chair and felt the warmth in his chest pulse once, slow and steady, the recognition he'd come to know. He was outside the ministry, in the cold February afternoon, with Hermione beside him and Grix organizing documents beside him and the grey London sky overhead, when Dumbledore came out. The old man walked through the ministry doors and stopped when he saw Harry, and they looked at each other on the pavement in the grey light, and the something complicated between them was present and real and didn't need to be resolved in this moment. Thank you, Harry said. For what you said in there. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. I should have said it earlier, he said. In different rooms, to different people, years ago. He looked at Harry with those old, weighted eyes. I wonder sometimes what you would have been like if I hadn't. He stopped. I'm not sure that's a useful line of thought. I think I would have been me, Harry said. Just earlier. He paused. Which might have created different problems. Something that was almost a smile moved across Dumbledore's face. Yes, he said. Probably. He looked at Hermione, who had been standing with the particular quality of someone present but not inserting themselves, and he said, Miss Granger. You were right, several times this year, when the evidence pointed somewhere uncomfortable. That is not a common quality. Hermione blinked. Then, thank you, Professor. Dumbledore looked back at Harry. Serious, he said. If the hearing goes, it'll go the way the evidence goes, Harry said. I've asked Grix to handle the documentation. Sirius deserves a trial, and when he has won, the evidence will speak. He's been in Azkaban for 10 years, Dumbledore said. He may not be, I know, Harry said. He did know. He'd thought about it carefully and the thinking had not been simple or comfortable. Azkaban did things to people, the Dementor proximity alone, 10 years of it. Sirius Black would not be the man his parents had known. He might be significantly broken. He might need time and care and patience in ways Harry couldn't fully anticipate. Whatever he is, Harry said, he deserves to be free and have what's been taken from him acknowledged. What comes after that we figure out after. Dumbledore nodded. He looked at Harry for one more moment, the long look of someone memorizing something, or acknowledging something, and then he turned and walked back into the ministry, and Harry watched him go. Are you all right? Hermione asked, beside him. Yes, Harry said. He meant it. What now? She asked. Harry looked at the grey London sky, at the city around them, at the magical world overlaid on the Muggle one in all its hidden complexity. He thought about Hogwarts waiting for them, and Neville and Ron in the common room, and Snape's Tuesday sessions that had become the most intellectually demanding part of his week, and Fawkes in the tower, and the fire in his chest that was deep and real and his. He thought about the Wizengamot filing the findings in 30 days. About Sirius's hearing in 14. About Voldemort diminished but not gone, fragments of him still somewhere in the world, the prophecy's reckoning deferred but not cancelled. About the magical underground, the half-bloods and Muggleborns and squibs who needed the system's rot acknowledged in the same public record where this morning's testimony now sat. About all of it. Back to school, he said. There's a lot of term left. Hermione laughed, brief and real, and it was the exact right response. The hearing for Sirius Black was held on a Thursday in late February, and Harry was there with Grix and the documentation and, in the gallery, Augusta Longbottom and Croker and McGonagall, who had not been asked to come but had come anyway. Sirius walked into the chamber under Auror escort and Harry looked at him for the first time. He was thin in the way people are thin when the thinness has gone structural, not just recent weight loss but years of it. His hair was long and hadn't been cut with any care, and his cheekbones were sharp under his skin, and his eyes, grey, the black family grey, startling in his face, moved across the chamber with the speed of someone who'd spent a decade hypervigilant and hadn't quite remembered how to stop. Then his eyes found Harry. He went very still. The Aurors on either side of him kept walking for 2 steps before registering the stop, and looked back, and Sirius wasn't moving at all. He was standing in the middle of the chamber looking at Harry with an expression that Harry didn't have a name for. It had grief in it and recognition and something that was very close to disbelief, the look of a man who'd stopped expecting certain things and was confronted suddenly with one of them. Harry met his gaze steadily. He didn't smile, this wasn't a smiling moment. He just met it, let Sirius see him, let the fact of him register. Sirius sat down. But his eyes came back to Harry twice more during the procedural opening. The hearing itself took 4 hours. Grix presented the documentation, the absence of formal charges, the absence of a trial record, the specific legal requirements that had not been met, the ministry correspondence from 1981 that referenced Sirius Black's incarceration in language that very carefully avoided the word trial. He cross-referenced the relevant statutes. He quoted the treaty provisions that made Goblin-documented evidence admissible in Wizengamot proceedings. Sirius testified. His voice was rougher than it probably had been, the consonants slightly imprecise in the way of someone who hadn't spoken at length in years, but the intelligence in it was intact, and the clarity, and the anger, controlled, focused anger, the kind that had survived 10 years because it had something specific to be about. He was articulate and devastating and absolutely believable, and when he finished the chamber was very quiet. The Wizengamot deliberated for 2 hours. Harry sat in the gallery and ate the sandwich Hermione had thought to pack and watched the clouds move outside the high windows and felt the warmth in his chest at its steadiest, the fire simply present, simply his. When the deliberation ended, Amelia Bones read the finding in the flat voice of someone reading an official record: Sirius Orion Black, imprisoned without trial in violation of Wisengamot statute, all charges formally reviewed and found insufficient for conviction without additional evidence, freed with full restitution of civil rights pending further investigation, compensation to be determined. Sirius sat in the respondent's chair with his eyes closed for a long moment. Just breathing. The Aurors beside him exchanged a glance and stepped back, and then Sirius opened his eyes and looked across the chamber and found Harry, and this time he did something with his mouth that was trying to be a smile and only partly managed it, and Harry returned it the same way. Outside the chamber, in the corridor, the Aurors handed over the formal paperwork and Sirius stood holding it with hands that weren't entirely steady. Harry walked up to him and stood in front of him, and neither of them said anything for a moment. Then Sirius said, in a voice that wasn't quite even, "You look like James. And Lily." Somehow both at the same time, which shouldn't work but does. He looked at Harry's eyes. "She had your eyes. Your mother." "I know," Harry said. Sirius stopped. He pressed the paperwork flat against his leg with one hand. I should tell you I'm not entirely." He stopped again, and the gap in the sentence was honest about the 10 years in it. "You don't have to explain anything," Harry said. "Not today." Sirius looked at him. Those gray eyes, sharp and carrying everything. "You got me out," he said. "The law got you out," Harry said. "I just made sure it had what it needed." "That's not," Sirius started. "It's exactly what it is," Harry said. "You've been in Azkaban for a decade on false imprisonment, and that's a wrong that needed righting. I righted it." He paused. "What happens next is you get somewhere warm and eat something and sleep somewhere with a real mattress, and everything after that can happen at whatever pace it needs to." He met Sirius's eyes. "I'm not going anywhere." Sirius was quiet for a long moment. He was doing something with his face that was the specific effort of a person who has been alone with their worst moments for so long that the presence of someone who simply looks at them and means what they say is almost unbearably difficult to receive. "Okay," he said. It came out roughly. "Yeah. Okay." McGonagall appeared at Harry's shoulder with the expression of someone who had prepared herself for this particular corridor moment and was holding it together with both hands. She looked at Sirius with the complicated expression of a woman who had taught him and then believed, for 10 years, the worst about him. "Mr. Black," she said. "I owe you an apology." Sirius looked at her for a moment. "Don't," he said. "Not today. Today is," he exhaled. "Today is for the okay things. The apologies can be on Tuesday." "Tuesday," McGonagall said. And nodded. March came in cold and sharp, and Harry returned fully to the rhythm of Hogwarts. The school had a different quality now, not because anything dramatic had visibly changed but because the information in the public record had changed, and information shapes the air it moves through. The prophet was doing what the prophet did, which was covering the findings exhaustively and inaccurately in roughly equal measure, and the common room discussions and the hallway conversations and the specific hum of 400 students living with a piece of recent history all had a new note in them. He still went to Snape's office on Tuesdays. The sessions had become, by slow, incremental degrees, measured in the specific units of Snape's willingness to engage with a student as an intellectual equal, the most interesting hour of Harry's week. They had moved, over the course of the year, from Harry asking questions about the Wolfsbane paper to Snape presenting problems that Harry worked through on his feet while Snape watched and occasionally said wrong, try again, with the particular quality of someone who means the error is useful rather than the error is failure. He had, 3 weeks ago, said to Harry across the office desk, "Your approach to potion magic interaction is consistently intuitive rather than systematic. You get to the right answer by a route that I can't always follow. This is simultaneously impressive and frustrating." "I can show you the route," Harry said. I know you can, Snape said. That's the point. They spent 40 minutes that session mapping Harry's intuitive approach into a reproducible framework, and at the end of it Snape had sat back and looked at the parchment they'd produced and said, with the extreme restraint of a person who was not accustomed to saying things like this is publishable. We could write it up together, Harry said. Snape had looked at him with the expression he wore when Harry said something he hadn't expected and needed a moment to categorize. You're 11, he said. I'll be 12 in July, Harry said. Snape made a sound that was not quite a laugh but was related to one. I'll consider it, he said, which Harry had already learned to translate as yes. He told Hermione on the way back from the Tuesday session and she said, a joint publication with Snape. You know the entire potions faculty in Britain will read it purely to see who convinced him to co-author something. That's not why I suggested it, Harry said. I know, she said. But it's still funny. She paused. He's different with you than with everyone else. He's different when someone is actually interested in what he knows, Harry said. Rather than what he's supposed to teach. He glanced at her. Same as most people. Hermione walked beside him in the evening light of the Hogwarts corridor and was quiet for a moment. It's a good thing, she said, what you do with people. Seeing what they actually are and responding to that rather than what they present as. You do the same thing, Harry said. Not as naturally, she said honestly. More consistently, he said. Which was also true, and she knew it, and she nodded. The last day of term came. The Hogwarts Express on the 1st of June, end of year, the particular quality of a journey where everyone is going in the same direction but toward different things, the school year releasing them all back into the wider world. Harry sat in a compartment with Ron and Hermione and Neville and watched the Scottish landscape unspool past the windows, the long summer light of early June making the hills golden. Ron was playing chess against himself, which he did when he was thinking, the board moving pieces without direction while he stared out the window. Neville had Trevor in his lap and was reading the advanced herbology text Harry had given him at Christmas, which he'd apparently read 4 times by now and had annotated comprehensively. Hermione was writing, she was always writing, a habit Harry matched if not exceeded, though his note-taking had a different quality from her essay drafting. Harry looked at them. These people, gathered in this compartment, chosen and known and real. He thought about where he'd been a year ago, the flat above the greengrocer, London, the last weeks of preparation before the letters. He thought about where he'd been 4 years ago, sitting in ash at 2 in the morning in the Desleys' garden with his hands glowing and the sense of something that had been pressed down for a long time finally opening. He pressed his hand flat on the seat beside him, feeling the warmth in his palm, the fire running easy and deep. What are you doing for the summer? Ron asked, not looking up from the chessboard. Sirius has a house, Harry said. Black family property. He's been staying there with a healer, the Wisengamot ruling included medical provisions as part of the restitution. He paused. He's better. Better than February. We've been corresponding. That's good, Ron said simply. My parents are making me do a full curriculum review, Hermione said, without looking up from her writing. I've told them there's nothing to review because I'm ahead of schedule, and they've told me that's not the same as a review. They've scheduled it for the 3rd week of July. My Gran has a summer reading list, Neville said. It's mostly history. She says ignorance of history is the first failure of judgment. She's right, Harry said. Neville looked at him over the herbology text. She wants to meet you properly, he said. She said after the Wisengamot session, after what you said about the protections and the stone, she said she wants to shake your hand. Harry smiled. I'd like that. The train moved through the landscape, the long golden light, and in the compartment the 4 of them moved in the comfortable specific quiet of people who know each other well enough to not need to fill every silence, and Harry let the journey happen around him, present and easy. At King's Cross, coming through the barrier into the Muggle side, into the noise and ordinary reality of the station, Harry walked out with his trunk in Hedwig's cage and the warmth in his chest steady as breathing. The Grangers were there. Richard and Helen, Richard raising a hand when he saw them, Helen already pulling Hermione into a hug while Hermione protested that she was fine. The Weasley contingent was a controlled explosion nearby, Molly Weasley wrapping Ron up and Ron bearing it with the long-suffering expression of someone who loves their mother and will not publicly admit how much. Neville's grandmother Augusta, with her vulture hat, standing a few feet from the main crowd with the posture of someone who doesn't do crowds but came anyway. She looked at Harry and walked to him and held out her hand and Harry shook it. "You did well," she said. "The truth in the record. That matters." "Neville helps," Harry said. "He's going to be excellent." Augusta Longbottom looked at him for a moment, the sharp assessment of it, and then she looked at her grandson, who was holding his toad and talking to Ron about something with his hands, animated and easy. Something moved in her face, private and complete. "Yes," she said. "He is." The station moved around them, the ordinary afternoon of it, the Muggle world conducting its business unaware that the people in it had just come from a year that had shifted something in the landscape of the world they overlaid. Harry stood in the middle of it with his trunk at his feet and the sun through the station's high windows on his face and Fawkes's presence at a distance, always at a distance now, always available, the warmth of the correspondence simply there, not fire, not urgency, just the ongoing fact of it. He thought about the summer ahead. Sirius's house. Real food, real sleep, real time to be somewhere new. The Gringotts Alliance and its slowly deepening architecture. Snape's paper, which he and Snape had agreed by letter to draft over the summer. The Wisengamot findings due in 30 days. The magical underground, the people at the edges of the system, who had been watching what happened in the last 6 months and would be watching what happened next. Voldemort, somewhere, diminished and furious, gathering what remained of himself towards some future return. He thought about the prophecy, that one must die at the hand of the other, that Harry had power Voldemort knew not. He thought about the fire in the last chamber, the fragment dissolving not through combat but through contact with something that was simply its antithesis. He thought about what that meant and what it might mean when the reckoning came fully, when Voldemort returned in force rather than fragment. Not today. Not this summer. But eventually, and Harry would be ready, and the readiness would not be Dumbledore's schedule or the prophecy's demand but simply the fact of what he was and what he'd built and what he stood with. He picked up his trunk. Looked around the station one more time. Ron caught his eye across the crowd and made the universal gesture of someone asking "Are you all right?" the slight tilt of the chin, and Harry returned the same, and Ron grinned and turned back to his mother. Hermione materialized at his elbow, her own trunk handled, her parents giving them a moment. She didn't say anything. She just stood there, and the standing there was the full communication. "See you soon," Harry said. "See you soon," she said. "Don't spend the whole summer reading." "You just told me not to spend the summer reading." "I said don't spend the whole summer reading. There's a difference." He laughed, and it was easy and real, and she smiled at it, and they went their separate ways into the city, into the summer, into everything that was coming. In a circular office in a castle in Scotland, a phoenix sat on a perch in afternoon light and the fire in its feathers was warm and deep and uncontained. No one had placed the perch under monitoring charms. No instruments measured what moved between the bird and the boy walking through a station 300 miles south. No bindings, no suppressions, no carefully timed revelations. Just fire, running free. Just a bridge, standing between both shores. Just a boy who had burned his own chains off at 7 years old and risen from ash into everything he was always going to be, not a savior, not a weapon, not a role someone else wrote for him. Himself. Entirely, completely, fiercely himself. The phoenix sang. The castle heard it. The afternoon light caught the frost still on the northern-facing stones and turned it briefly, brilliantly gold. "Dawn," the song said. "Dawn."